Hello, everyone.
Hey everybody.
Mark is going to lead today because I'm. You know what happened? Last week I was sick too when I did this, but I don't know. I managed to push through. But I got the flu, and then I've had it for now 9 days. But it seems to go from good to bad to good to bad. It's like the facts of life. Dun, 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 dun. Anyhow, let's see.
hmm
We are here. How many people? Oh, we actually got a lot of people watching. So, hey, everyone. So,
Welcome.
welcome. And before we get going, holy moly, there's a lot of questions already. Um,
It seems like it's mostly discussion about whether who the creator was, because if they didn't see the newsletter, they're like, who,
me,
or I guess read the description, because it
me.
actually, is it in the description? Or no, I guess it doesn't say. It just says you have
Hey,
the
man,
co-author. It's me,
it's
Mark. I'm
it's me, the creator of Roll for Combat. Hi.
yeah, no, it's not Steven.
It's not
Uh
Steven. Nope.
some people thought that I created Pathfinder First Edition, which I did not. I came in about halfway through for Pathfinder Unchained. Technically, I'm in the Monster Codex for one thing I did when it was almost done, but it needed one additional monster written. We do have a newsletter, Labib. If you go to, I think,
Battlezoo.com
rollforcombat.com,
or
it'll just
rollforcombat.com and wait 5 seconds and then a
yeah,
pop
it'll
up
just
will
try
appear.
to pop up and get you to subscribe to the newsletter. It's got stories about the monsters and all of the
It's quite big.
info.
Actually, today's was very long. It took me like 3 hours to lay it out. It's
Yeah,
took a
we
while.
we actually have we give a pretty good amount of information on it. It had a feat in there, and yeah, we do have a newsletter. But yes, I'm one of the co-creators of Pathfinder 2e. There were four co-creators. We worked together on it and did a lot of things. One of the people in chat was referencing a fact that Logan and I wrote a lot of the text in the Pathfinder 2e final core rulebook that you have. Logan estimates that I may have written over half the text. I think it's a little bit under, but as I've said, it's very clear that between Logan and me that we wrote at least 70% of that text together. That's because at the time Jason was doing, I don't know if you've seen Knights of Everflame. It's a really awesome actual play. And Steven was wrangling things for the bestiary. So Logan and I did a lot of the core rulebook, words. But the conceptualizing was a team effort. All the decisions, like big decisions about what to do, were ones that we would discuss together. And yeah, that was a very stressful and tough time, but obviously it's very rewarding to see how many people love Pathfinder Second Edition. So I'm here with Steven, and Steven's going to help me find questions in chat. And if you have any, I will answer them, except for if they're rules questions about an ambiguous rule, then I'm not going to, it's a policy that I have that in general Paizo goes by as well, of not giving some kind of definitive answer to that, mainly because it doesn't actually help. Just all it's going to do is people just try to use them in online rules arguments, and then it will just get nowhere because someone will say, well, it doesn't matter that Mark wrote that rule, he's still wrong because the book says this thing that and I read that to mean what I want it to mean. So all it does is just generally stir up drama. If you ask a question about something that I think is just unambiguously in the book, then I can answer that. But if it's something where it's well, how would this be interpreted? I'm just going to say, you and your GM can figure that out, because it's not my place, or even really the place in general of the Paizo design team, unless they get together as a whole and issue an FAQ or errata to make an off the cuff ruling on that.
So if you have specific questions, obviously super chats will get answered right away. Otherwise, we'll scan it. And so many people are moving over to Pathfinder, and they sold it was 180,000 copies, something insane with that Humble bundle. It was over 100,000 copies that I know. So that's a lot of people were joining, and I saw a whole bunch of other people had questions about Pathfinder, and
Yeah.
we can ask, and we can even just talk about. Doesn't have to be rules. It could be like what books to buy and what are the better books and what do you want to
Mm-hmm.
use,
Yeah, I'm
specific
really
books
interested in
for
answering questions that
anything
aren't
really.
rules.
Yeah,
So the first question was, we have a newsletter. The
yeah,
second question was rules text specifically or lore stuff included. I guess they're talking about like the amount of text in the core rulebook. So the percentages I gave you are accurate about how much I think Logan and I did on the core rulebook, but the lore chapter in particularly, a lot of that was from James Jacobs and that little chapter in the core rulebook. The fact that we didn't write that is part of why it's 70% and not like a higher percent. And also there were certain chapters where Jason or Steven did write, like Jason did a lot of the introduction chapter, for example, of the core rulebook. So there, he managed to get that in, even though he had all that stuff with Knights of Everflame. So there were various sections that are, it's always a team effort. Let's see, are there any other questions?
yes.
Zach Jennings is wondering if flat-footed works with melee spell attacks. So as long as you're in melee, and if you're talking about flanking, as long as you're in melee, you can be flanking. That would include a melee spell attack. Flat-footed, the condition works on any attack roll, but you're not necessarily going to be able to flank. You can't flank them with a ranged attack. But if they're tripped or if they are flat-footed because of some special effect that says they become flat-footed or faint from the scoundrel that just makes them flat out flat-footed and not just to melee attacks, like the upgraded one. If you have anything that just says flat-footed and doesn't specify what it's flat-footed to, that applies to all attack rolls and not just to not just to strikes.
So we have a super chat. Eric S.
Ooh.
Riley, $5. Why do some magic items have fixed DCs for special effects? This gives them an unfortunate shelf life. How would you make these more flexible?
So magic items having a shelf life is in general, like, it is not. So magic items having no shelf life is actually worse than magic items having a shelf life. Neither of them are ideal. I would say the best way to do it, and therefore the way I did it in Battle Zoo Bestiary when Steven asked me to write up a new way of doing things, is to allow the characters to pay more money to upgrade the item to raise its DC. That's because if you just have an item that does some kind of weird and unbalancingly good effect, then you can be safe in the fact that if it's like let's talk about the arrows from there's some arrows that were in Treasure Vault. They were so busted they were eroded immediately on the day the Treasure Vault was released, because you basically automatically won with those arrows if you could hit your opponent. On a critical success, they slowed until they spent an action to remove the slowed, which basically they're just done. You just keep firing those arrows at them. Now they did have incapacitation, but even so, like, the best they can hope for is a critical success, and a critical success was still just fight ending if you had a lot of those arrows at high levels. They're expensive, so not until high levels. Now the DC is low. Now Paizo was able to fix that because of the way DCs work by simply making it so the critical success was no effect and moving the effects down by one. If it didn't have that feature, it would actually still be kind of problematic because of the fact that, fortunately, when you're using it against above leveled opponents, not only is it incapacitation, the DC doesn't go up because the effects are actually still a little much on what it does other than that. But because of the combination of incapacitation and the DCs, by the time you could spam it and just have a quiver full of these things and not care about the cost, the DC is also low enough that you can reliably, because the reason why I'm saying it would otherwise be an issue is the success effect was like very powerful, and just basically that's going to be it because they're slowed until they spend an action to remove it on a success. So basically, it's not great for an item to completely obsolete. It's even worse for items to never obsolete, and even when they're at a low cost, just be ridiculously powerful attacks because of spam. So the way to get around it is to have a way to upgrade, pay a little bit more. That way, you're not spamming a ton of them as low level items. You're paying to have the higher DC and let them raise the DC. I would always allow my players to do that, even if they're not using monster parts. If they want to pay more to get an upgrade on an item that they like to keep its effects relevant.
So, Cheese of Ages said, "What would you say is the hardest thing to create homebrew for in 2e, and what are some of the tips you have to make it easier?"
Okay, so there are two things that are the hardest thing. The hardest thing is just rewriting huge chunk of the math of the game, such as the monster part system. That is like the hardest thing to do. Like, oh yeah, redo the entire economy. That's the hardest thing I've done for like a side project, other than for like, creating the system is harder in the first place because you have to figure out what the system is going to be. The second hardest is probably a after like a system that changes the way that the whole game works is going to be a class. That's because classes are so much of a person's identity. You have to get it right to a level and a degree of attention that really you would not expect to need for, say, if you were just designing a single item. It's okay if there's some things that are a little shakier on that. Was with the class, it just has to work. And there's so many parts, there's so many things that you can't just do heuristically, and that you have to understand the interconnections.
I mean, basically, everything's hard in Pathfinder. I mean, unless you truly understand how everything connects, I'd say it can all be pretty hard if you don't understand the interconnections of.
I don't know. So I would say if you're designing for your home group,
Yeah,
it's actually pretty easy to make something that is going to be fine. It's not going to throw off your game.
Yeah.
If you're trying to design and publish it so that anybody can use it, and it's not going to throw off the meta when someone online finds some weird combination with it, then that's tricky. That's not easy to do for anyone. And I mean, even professional companies let through a few things that that don't work in that regard because it's just very, very challenging. That's true for any edition, though. That's true for 5e. That's true for Pathfinder First. Oh, it was even more true for Pathfinder First.
Yeah, it's a little tricky, but if you have questions, you can go to the Discord, and a lot of people always post their ideas and ask for feedback, and a lot of us give it, and or actually on the Reddit channel too. A lot of people give feedback, and Pathfinder people are pretty nice, and they'll usually give good feedback and not just snarky comments. Mark Decken for $5 said,
Black Tendril Shut doesn't have incap. Egads.
What?
I didn't even notice that. Well, then it's even more important that the DC doesn't scale, right? Because that would just be the only meta that you would need to pretty much win at high levels if it did.
So Mark asked, the power scaling for Pathfinder 2e is very high, i.e. Very large bonuses and HP over time. Is there anything you could recommend to reduce that power scaling? The only joke is it's actually the opposite. The power scaling is really, really low. It's you don't get that much. I mean, it's practically a straight line.
Even compare it to 5th edition, though. That's where a lot of people are coming from. In 5th edition, you don't add your level to anything.
Yeah, I guess.
You only have proficiency. Now, there's some busted stuff you can get, depending on what combination of character you build, that can definitely make high level play in 5e, make it so that the players are just going to win against deadly encounters or double deadly encounters very easly. But the scaling of the math is what they're talking about in that question. And in that case, well, you could use the proficiency without level variant that I wrote for the Game Mastery Guide if you want. Like, personally, I think that the scaling is good and that it helps the game by a significant amount because there's a lot of secret sauce to the way that math works out, but it makes it so that like you can fight an ogre as a boss, and then when you level up, that ogre can be like a mook, and the encounters work both times, and you don't need to use something like elites or bosses as like a tag and then build them differently, like in D&D fourth edition needed to do. And there's nothing wrong with needing to do that, but I think it's very elegant if you don't have to do that and can kind of use the same monsters either way. And scaling is a huge part of what helps you do that.
I like it. I like it that you start hitting and you start seeing 30s and you start seeing 40s. We just saw our first 54 the other night in a combat
Nice.
roll. I know. I was like,
I'm
damn, man.
very impressed by
Well, it was the
54.
monster. It wasn't the PCs.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm very impressed. Good job, Monster.
That was a level 16 demon or devil. And I'm like, of course, you always like, does a 54 hit? And the players are always like, stop being a smartass. It's like, you always know that hits. But yeah, it scales, but it's all relevant. It's like a video game. I mean, when everyone's rolling in those 30s and 40s, it's not it all makes sense and everything scales correctly at the high levels. So I wouldn't worry about it. And to be honest, the math is so complex. Like even if you start tinkering with a little, you'll very quickly unravel it, and I wouldn't touch it.
I mean, I have the opposite opinion. I think that it's complex and sturdy enough that you can tinker with it, and it's probably going to be okay for your game.
For your
If you
game,
know what
okay,
you
you're
want, if
right.
you
You're
know
right.
what you want out of it,
Yeah. Okay,
it
for your
is true
game.
that because of the degrees of success and
I was about to say that
because of
requires.
degrees of success, even a +1 matters a lot
Yeah.
in Pathfinder Second Edition. But when you tinker with it, you need to know what you're trying to do. That's why the proficiency without level system is like, listen, by reducing the scaling, these high level monsters are not as dangerous anymore, and a horde of low level monsters are more dangerous. So
Mhm.
you've changed what is dangerous and what isn't, but you can still make it work. You just have to make adjustments, or don't make adjustments if you're trying to do a particular effect and it's doing what you want.
So we got a lot of general questions that were
Great,
not super chatted. Too many. I'm
let's
trying
do
to see if I
some.
can find them all, but one of them is really long though. It's the flow of stealth, because the flow of stealth. I would
Well, I will
recommend.
just give a TLDR on
Okay.
it. So basically, it was stealth. You've read it in the book. You're still asking me, so I'm not going to try to explain it like that. I'll just try to explain it a different way to see if it's easier to understand for you. So, if you think of stealth as a continuum, where on one side we'll say, I'll use numbers for this because some people understand better with numbers. Because if you want to read it with words, it's right there in the core rule book. Zero stealth, we'll call it zero stealth. That is observed. That means that they're directly looking at you. They see you. They or use some other precise sense. They can target you, no problem. So then there is hidden. We'll call that one stealth, one step of stealth. They can't really see you right now, but for whatever reason, they know pretty much where you are. Maybe they heard a sound of you dropping something, and they're like, oh, what's that over there? But they know basically what square you're in. They've got a 50-50 chance to target you successfully. All right. So then there's undetected. That means that they don't know where you are. They probably still know that you're in the room. We'll call that stealth 2. If they don't even know that you're there at all, that's unnoticed, which means you're both undetected and they don't know you're there at all. We can call that stealth 3. That only happens like before the fight. And honestly is a very rare scenario. So normally you're between 0, which is observed, 1, which is hidden, and 2, which is undetected. Now, based on your degrees of success when you're hiding and sneaking around, or someone is trying to look for you, you move around that continuum of stealth. So when you're at 0 stealth and you're observed and you hide, you move to 1 stealth. When you're at 1 stealth and you're hidden and you sneak lets you move around to a different spot. So now they don't know where you are. If you're successful, you move to stealth 2. That's undetected. Now, when someone else seeks you, they will, on a success, move you down from stealth 2 to stealth 1, and you become hidden if you were undetected. On a critical success, um, they're going to make you all the way to observed. So that's just generally how things roll. Is that if it goes in your way by one step, then stealth moves down by that. I believe also on a sneak action, on a failure to sneak, when you were already hidden when you're sneaking, right? You're trying to become undetected. You're trying to go from 1 to 2. So if you fail, you stay at stealth 1. You're still hidden, but they hear a sound and they know where you are. If you critically fail, then you go down to 0 and you're observed because you just did so badly. So it's almost like stealth is, if you do understand victory point subsystems, where critical success is +2 points, a success is +1 point, a failure is nothing happens, and critical failure is -1 point. It's almost like it's got its own little point system there that the successes and failures are causing. So that's my TLDR.
Yeah.
I tried to explain it a different way.
No, it's good. I mean, stealth also in combat's like, until you get to the higher levels, you don't really have to worry about that too much, because once you start fighting, it goes to 0 pretty quickly. So, there actually also is a very good tutorial on stealth on how it's played. He goes through it in extreme detail.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you want more detail, and he goes through it really step by step by step. The good news is stealth, by the time you're getting to use stealth at these levels, like in our 14th level game, we actually do use stealth because people are always disappearing and hiding. And in that case, it just becomes like a 20% mischance or 50% mischance, most likely. That's pretty much the standard for our games, and it's just it's actually pretty easy to deal with. So we have a question. The amount of books out there, where should they start to know the lore? They want to learn the Galarian
lore. I think that a starter point is Lost Omens World Guide. It should give you a taste of the lore and help you figure out what you like the most when you read that. It's sort of like a sampler, and then sometimes you'll find a whole big book about one of the topics that's on there. So if you read it and you're like, Mwangi Expanse is my jam, well, good for you. There's a Mwangi Expanse book that's a giant book entirely about Mwangi Expanse. So you could use it as a sampler and then go to anything in the Lost Omens line is going to be a great book, just to be honest. But World Guide is a good, like, let's get started. What is even going on here?
Something else that people talk about very rarely is the first edition books. The lore still works more or less. I mean,
oh yeah, sure, but
maybe
some
like
of it's not
1%
because the time has passed
right
in the world. But
right. That's what I'm saying. Like 1-2% might be a little out of date, but all those lore books, and those you can get for super cheap. And there's a lot of them. I mean, I continuously go back because they might not have. They put out a lot of lore books for Pathfinder First Edition, and I don't think they really are going to redo those anytime soon. So, if you want to know about something that's not covered in a second edition book, just go to your first edition book, and you'll find everything you need.
And so, also, I saw from Gafford what adventure path from 1 to 20 is best for first big campaign after some low level ones. So, if you're specifically looking for 1 to 20s, that are 6-parter that go all the way, I've noticed that there are a lot of people who do who've done like sort of polls of this, and it just depends on your group.
I disagree with those polls. I don't understand those polls because a lot of those.
I told you, by the way, you must have seen the most recent polls because you always say that you think Extinction Curse is one of the most popular. It's constantly near the bottom on those polls. Someone did a thread recently where they
no, not Extinction Curse. Polls. Forget about Extinction Curse. Agents of Edgewatch.
That's also.
I freaking love it. I can't get enough. I think it's an absolute masterpiece.
Paizo Adventure Paths are awesome. So being towards the bottom of Paizo Adventure Paths still means that it's good.
Yeah, but I still can't believe that. I mean, I can get it. I know why, but because it's a very specific genre, and if you're not into it, you're not into it. But as someone who can see all this 70s and 80s movies they based the adventures off of it that you're actually now playing, it has a special place in my heart. I love that adventure path.
So I suggest Strength of Thousands for just a starting group that's just doing their thing. However, if they really like fighting in dungeon crawls, Strength of Thousands is I mean, it's got fights, it's got some dungeons, but it is like you're at a magic school and there's a lot more variety, so it's not necessarily the best choice. I know it violates the terms of what you asked for, really is not a 1 to 20 adventure path, but if they want a dungeon crawl, Abomination Vaults is one that you can quickly get now with the Foundry module for super cheap on the Humble Bundle before the extended time is over tomorrow. So if you want, I would get it because
or you could get the greatest adventure path ever written in history.
Yeah, that also would
Jewel of the
violate
Indigo Isles,
things, but is also a great adventure path. Like, and even you could see the art for Jewel of the Indigo Isles on this stream.
Yeah. Someone, 25 North, they had a good summary. The review, I think, was a little too spoilery myself, but that's okay. They did say that the ending is the most metal ending they've ever seen in Adventure Path, and that describes it. It is very metal. It is very.
I didn't see the review.
It was very Stranger Things. It's like the ending. It goes to. It doesn't even go to 11. It goes to 20. I mean that ending is like. We went above and beyond. That ending is insane. even I'm reading it. I've added it 1,000 times. I'm like, this ending is so freaking nuts. It is the craziest ending for an adventure path.
It was very difficult adventure. I know because obviously I talked a lot with Linda when she was writing it, and it was hard, even with all of her experience on
it is a metal. It's very metal. It is a very hardcore metal adventure path at the end. But that adventure path, I'm gearing up I have to run it now. Everyone wants me to run it. Everyone wants me to run it. The good news is I'm like, I could run it. I don't even need to look at the damn thing. I practically memorized the whole thing. I've had to edit it for so long. It goes so many places. I keep reading it. I'm like, man, this is like the craziest adventure path because it really just goes everywhere. It's really just totally nuts. By the end, you're like, what is going on? Always be escalating. Pedro Roca gave us 20 R's. I don't know what that is.
I think that we figured out that was Brazilian real.
Brazilian real. $3.28 or 82 cents. What happens when you get stunned on your turn? The stun condition says you can't act. Does that interfere with the capability of acting that turn? What about reactions?
So, technically,
well, why don't you talk about the difference between stun and daze? Because people are always confused.
Well, there is no daze condition.
Not daze. Stun and...
You mean stun and slowed?
Slowed. Sorry, I meant slowed, yeah.
Okay, so technically both stunned and slowed conditions take away your actions at the beginning of your turn.
Right.
Slowed is for a duration, and it has a number, and you lose that many actions every turn for the duration at the start of your turn. This also means if you get slowed in the middle of your turn, it won't do anything until the next turn. Stunned is a little different. It has a certain number of actions it wants to take away from you, which, like slowed, it starts applying at the beginning of your next turn, but you can't act at all until it does so. This leads to a corner case, which is being asked in this question, where what happens if your turn starts, you haven't done anything, and somehow somebody stuns you, or maybe they stunned you after your first action. Now, the equitable thing to do, since stunned is trying to take away a certain number of actions and won't let you act again until it does, especially if you only got like stunned one and you had 2 actions left. The equitable thing to do, which is not necessarily what the rule says, right, might be to just take the action off now and then let you act again. Like, let's say you acted once, got stunned one by a reaction, just take it off and leave you with 1 action. Technically, the rule says that it only takes off the actions starting on your next turn, and you can't act until it does. So the stunned one would become like a stunned, way more powerful than like you would assume it's supposed to be. So that's sort of a timing issue that you have to figure out how to do a fair and reasonable way of handling that corner case. Technically, the rules do say that stun and slowed happen at the start of your turn. That's when they take away the actions.
Also, stunned overrides slow.
That's sort of. They're not cumulative. So if slow is taking away one of your actions at the beginning of your next turn and you're also stunned, that'll handle the one action you need to pay to stun. But it is still true that you can't act until let's say it didn't happen on your turn, so we were ignoring that quarter case. But like off turn, maybe you're a monster and your PCs hit you with slow and like a critical hit stuns. They're not going to lose two actions from that. They'll only lose the one, but they still can't act until they lose the one for stun, meaning they can't take reactions.
So when you're stunned, there's not a lot you can do. It sort of sucks. I mean, I would use that very carefully and sparingly. I usually have as a home rule is that basically anything that stuns, I don't allow PCs to do it, and in turn I try to never do it. I still do slowed, because slowed actually is a bigger part of the game and comes up more frequently. But stunned, I feel, is so overpowering for both PCs and monsters that I try to remove it, or I substitute it with slow, because to take someone out of the game completely is not fun for anyone. So it's unless you give me a really good reason, I usually don't even have it in the game, or I'll just override it with slowed instead. But slowed, believe it or not, if you're smart, because I had one of my NPCs, one of my bad guys, he was slowed too, and he got one action. So I said to my friend, well, I gets one action, he's going to trip you. And he's like, what? I'm like, yep, and he did it. And he's like, ha, see? It's like that ended up costing you. It's like, because it's such a pain in the neck to come up from trips. And then all of his other buddies could beat on him while he was down on the ground. It's like, see, don't give me just one action. I can do a lot with one action. So when you know the rules, you can do a lot. You got to be careful. That one action, you can still do things. Chase Street sent $20. It says, I've been playing Pathfinder 2nd Edition since the start, and I love Impossible Lands. I especially love everything about Geb, along with Bloodlords. Is there any chance of an even more in-depth dive into Geb in the future? Well, you don't know directly, but there's been stuff in the past. I mean, there's the Impossible Lands book, so I don't know how much more you're going to get than this. I mean, look at the size of this monster.
Between the Book of the Dead entry, which is short on it, but Book of the Dead being written by Geb himself, theoretically, and having all that stuff in his voice, where he's just like, so he's like the absolute like necromancy magical tech bro, and it's hilarious. It's hilarious how evil he is and how like arrogant he is, and it works out really well. So between the Impossible Land section on Geb, between the adventure path in Geb, my guess, this is not based on any inside information, but purely based on just like what Paizo has done in the past, is that Paizo has so many other things that they want to talk about that they're very unlikely, my guess,
it's not coming back.
Put out like another book that is just Geb after Geb has been in so many books already. I can easily be wrong, and I have been in the past on predicting things, but that is what I would say, is that we probably got the amount that we're going to see about
there's that first level that Pathfinder First Edition adventure in the Mana Wastes. I heard it wasn't.
Oh, sure. If you're going to Pathfinder First, there's other content. There's even a Pathfinder Society scenario. You only die twice, where you disguise the undead and go to Geb. And certain other things.
If you're into lore, there's a lot in Pathfinder First Edition if they're just looking for lore. And I'm trying to remember, I think it's like a level 15 adventure, or level 16 adventure. You go in the Mana Wastes. I can't remember the name of the adventure if someone wants to throw that in chat real quick. And then, of course, there's my absolute favorite, which they're not really part of the Impossible. No, the Impossible Lands is Iron Gods. No, that's not right. That's not Iron. That's
Iron Gods in Numeria, which is part of like I think the Broken Lands.
The Broken Lands. Like that. That's right. I always get those.
It's easy to get confused because they both have lands.
Yeah, I got confused for a second.
So I'm really confused by the question, why does Mark keep becoming the world? And I don't know what it is. I don't know what that means.
I
But
don't know.
Alexander the Archangel for $5 asks, how do you recover from cockatrice's slowed condition? And
That
isn't there an errata
that
for
I found
cockatrice?
that. I found that
Yeah, I
mistake.
know. Actually, Steven sent it to me years ago when I was still at Paizo, and I flagged it for errata.
That's
And
right.
I thought that
It's automatic. You get it after
it
one
is.
turn.
It's in. I see
Yeah.
it in Nethys right now.
Yeah.
Um,
I errated that personally.
yeah, where you pointed it out, and I put it into the system, and then we got it done. So you just keep making saves to recover every 24 hours.
Or you can, well, yeah. I mean, I think I made it. It was pretty brutal the way it was. I think how I did it. I forgot how I did it, but I made it a little less brutal. We had that because that happens in Extinction Curse in like level 1 or something. Like you come across a cockatrice, and our monk got slowed, and he was slowed for like days after that. So yeah.
Now you're still possibly slowed for days because every day you get a chance to remove it, but at least you're not slowed indefinitely.
Yeah, it was bad. It was bad. Yeah, there's a couple of monsters. Most of them should have been errated by now. If you look at the book and you're not sure, either look at the erratas or go to Archives of Nethys because they usually have the updated version. So going back, I have to scroll back to where we were. Where were we? Do. Wow, we got a lot. Oh boy. Okay, let me keep going. Keep going. All right. Thank you for the formatting of Pathfinder Second Edition. That's right, because Mark did the formatting.
I did not.
I know you had nothing to do with the formatting.
I did not do the formatting. I mean, depending on your definition of formatting, if you're talking specific about like some of the way that the wording was structured, that would be a conversation that a lot of people had that I was in on. If you're talking about the layouts and the art, I was basically not involved with that. Other than that they showed it some things to us and we gave a little bit of feedback, but the amazing art team at Paizo does a great job. And
I've slightly updated it in places with ours, but not much. It's a pretty bulletproof layout.
Yeah,
let's say 9.5 out of 10, like 0.5, like a little bit here and there I adjusted, but otherwise in fact, the 5e layout we use is the Pathfinder layout for 5e because it's so superior. So let's see. We had a question. What content are you most excited for 2023? I don't know if they're asking about Pathfinder content or
I don't know.
content.
Do they mean like just movies and games in general?
what content are you most excited for?
Our own content, because I'm excited for Year of Monsters and Eldamon. Also, Strange and Unusual, Battle to Bestiary, but I am literally the author who's writing everything for both of the other books, so I'm slightly more excited for the ones that I'm writing, but I'm excited for all of them.
And Stenos came out today. I got them out barely in time.
Stenos are something that I have wanted for a while.
I like Stenos. They're fun.
Yeah, they have a lot of cool stuff that's in
funny.
there. So if you have your monsters, you will have Stenos.
Mm-hmm. And if you saw the newsletter, I even gave everyone a sneak peek of the fun. I like that feat.
The Popular Familiar.
Yeah, where one of your snakes in your hair is a familiar. So you get to literally have a familiar in your head. But that was fun.
Have your snake and don't eat it.
There's a lot. I mean, there's Year of Monsters. There's RPG Superstar coming up. There's new unannounced.
I don't consider that a product, I guess, but
who knows? There's a lot going on. Actually, there's too much. Let's see. Anonymous 13 said. Oh, actually, before that, whoa, there's a lot more.
Oh wait, Alexander said that it only still lists a way to recover from the full petrification, not from the slowed condition. Okay. I mean, I never know exactly when the errata come out. It looks like Elftro says that it does not have any errata. So I would say expect it in whenever there's bestiary.
No, wait. I this is what I did. Look up there was cockatrice, and then there's what else freezes you?
Basilisk, you have to bathe
Basilisk.
in their blood.
I basically looked at other monsters that had similar rules and then adapted it. That's how I did it. Especially because that's a lower level monster, so I made it easier. So whatever the Basilisk had is what I used for that. There's another monster that also slows you, where like every round you have to do a save, and then if you fail, you go slowed 3, 2, 1, and then you turn into stone. I remember that. That wasn't a basilisk. That was something
There's
else.
a lot of them that are
Yeah,
like
there's a
that.
lot that do that.
Basilisk and Cockatrice and Medusa. A lot of them do that
Yeah.
because it's more fun than being turned to stone right away. Being
Right.
like, oh no, I'm partially
Well,
stone.
and did we do it right? In our game, we get the guy was like slowed too, and he was going to fail the save, so we gave him haste. So then, in theory, he should be okay because he was
Says
hasted.
as long as you have any actions,
Right,
that you're
right.
But
So
weirdly, when the haste spell runs out, he might get petrified.
Well, and what ended up happening, he got hasted, and then he got slowed 1, but he's really slowed 2 because he got haste because he has 4 actions, so he was okay. No, he was slowed 1, and we gave him haste. That's when we did him because we're worried that he was going to die. And then he went back to slowed 2 because of haste, and then went and failed and went to slowed 1. And we were like, dude, you would have died if we didn't give you haste.
The really scary thing is minions only have 2 actions.
Yeah, well, they're dead. And then he made a saves and he came right back.
Got petrified by Basilisk like right away because I rolled a natural 1 and I only had 2 actions.
Yeah.
Let's see.
We got a whole bunch.
Yeah, we got a bunch. I
new
saw
GM,
some that were really easy, like when is RPG Superstar coming out? This month. And can Rogue sneak attack more than once in a single turn? Yes. So I figured I'd answer those because I can answer them in
do the super quick ones. Let's see. In your opinion, what goes into designing and engaging hazard? Oof, that's tough. Hazards are hard. Well, because you have simple hazards and you have complex hazards. Actually, I love complex hazards because to me, complex hazards just keep going off, and they're like basically. We talked about that last week.
Yeah, they're a lot of fun.
Yeah, the complex hazards are awesome.
Whole episodes on Arcane Mark, my Twitch stream at twitch.tv/Arcane Mark about building hazards.
Yeah.
But also with Linda Zeiss Palmer, who is like the head honcho of all of like narrative and adventures at Paizo and knows a lot about putting hazards into things. But basically, for a hazard, you want to build something that is interesting and that adds to the story in a certain way, that the story of the hazard and like why it's there make you think a little bit. And it's not just like, also it should be something that has some narrative consequence, not just like, oh, a spear stabbed you for 8 damage. Okay, we keep going.
Yeah, I
guess we heal.
You always have to have either consequence or I make them have something on them like they stink. Or something bad that they can't get rid of right away. That let people know they got tripped up by that hazard. It's like if you steal money and then the ink explodes in your hands, and then now you're covered in ink in real world. So I do something like that. Like if a hazard goes off, almost always it's like, oh, I lost 50 hit points, okay, and then you just heal it. It's like big deal. But I make it that, oh, you just set that off. Now everyone knows you're here, or something like that. Yeah. It's like
there should be some reason that it matters. And also, therefore, some reason you feel cool if you disabled it instead of triggering it and running into it. Although generally, you also want the hazard to have like one thing about it that's a little scary due to the fact that it's just going to be one and done anyway. That's why hazards are one of the only things in the game that tend to have one extreme statistic. Most other things at lower levels don't have any extreme statistics, but a hazard usually has one. And is it that it's very hard to find it? Is that the scary thing? So it'll probably not be noticed and it'd be likely to go off. But if you find it, then you're set and you're going to be okay. Is it that it's really hard to disable? So you're like, oh, I found this pretty easily, but are we going to be able to actually disable this, or is it going to set off in our faces? Because remember, only a critical failure makes it set off in your faces. So you might need an extreme for that. Or is the extreme that it's just brutally dangerous? So it's like, it's not that hard to find it. It's not even that likely we'll set it off in our faces. We'll probably disable it, but we could still roll a 1 and it's possibly brutally dangerous.
So we have a whole bunch of questions, but 2 things. 1, do like and subscribe. And 2nd, if you super chat, we'll answer your questions right away because I'm still like probably 30 minutes behind. I'm scrolling through trying to answer everyone's questions, but your super chat will answer right away. You don't have to wait. My favorite hazard again was in Agents of Edgewatch, man. It's really good hazards, and one of them is, oh my god, it was so good. It's a false door, and every time you open the door, things explode in your face. And John Statz is playing the rogue, and he has a passive perception to find it, and he failed every single time. And he got so mad at me that he opened up every single exploding door in that freaking dungeon, including 3 in a row. 3 in a row. He was so mad at me. I'm like, dude, man, you're failing. You're failing your rolls, and you just open doors. You don't even search. You're just running up to them and hoping they don't explode in your face. That's a lot of fun. Say that's how you have fun. You have funny things happen to them. What's the best way to convince fairly new 5e players to try Pathfinder without making them put down a lot of money first? Well,
I mean, Archives of Nethys has stuff for free.
and the beginner box is $40 if you can find
also,
it. I mean,
for one more day,
yes.
there's a humble bundle up where the beginner box is like super ridiculously cheap. If you
Yeah,
want
$25 you get like $500 worth of stuff.
$25 you get the entire adventure path, the Foundry module, a core rulebook, the game mastery guide, Secrets of Magic, like a bunch of other adventures. The beginner box, I don't even remember everything you get. Those are just ones I remember off the top of my head because I was like, oh, this is some really good stuff. Like Bestiary 2, the Lost Omens Ancestry Guide is in there. You get a lot of the regular Bestiary, Lost Omens World Guide. That was one that came up earlier in our conversation here. You get a lot of stuff in that for $25. So I would recommend that if you don't want to use Archives of Nethys. Like if they're used to 5e, where you have like a Beyond subscription and you pay for it again in Beyond and all of those other things, like it's not expensive to get started in Pathfinder.
No, it's all free. And no one ever believes me. They're like, it's like,
yeah, it's free.
Free.
It's in there. Get Path Builder for free or pay a little bit for some of the other functionality and build a character.
You can start playing Pathfinder for nothing. I mean, it's Archives of Nethys and Path Builder, and you're done. You literally have everything you need. It's like pretty easy to just get started. So, if you're a GM, you might want to spend a little bit because it might be a little easier. But the players, and there's there's lots of pre-built characters at paizo.com you can download. And so if you don't even want to build a character, you can just use a pre-built. There's tons. And we got pre-built at battlezoo.com too. You could use ours.
So it looks like there's a question about why we used the Vancian magic instead of 5e magic in Pathfinder 2. So the question, whenever anyone asks, why did you change something from the way it was in 5e in Pathfinder 2e? The problem with that question is that we don't, and I know you didn't ask it exactly that way, but I've seen it a lot in that direction, is that we did not start with 5e. In fact, the very, very earliest day talks about Pathfinder 2e were like slightly before 5e was fully released. I mean, not before it had some of its playtest stuff out, but before it was fully released. So it started with Pathfinder 1e. And so Pathfinder 1e had Vancian magic. So the default was always going to be, one of our goals with the system was that it did not like change the narrative and the story that the developers who worked on adventures wanted to tell. At least not unless it was necessary to do so. And if so, it should feel the same as how it was happening before. And so any time that we didn't do something like Pathfinder 1e, that was a discussion. The discussion didn't start with the default of, well, in 5e, it works this way. And so that's sort of where things were at. Now, I mean, I like flexible spellcasting as long as it's balanced. And I think that the archetype in Secrets of Magic helps it takes away some spells so that you pay for the fact that you are just absolutely better than a prepared and a spontaneous and how flexible you are. So you have to be strategic about which spells you take, but you can work it out in that direction. Honestly, I think there's a lot of things that could in any game that designers always want to re-examine things and do things differently. And there's a lot of things that are the way they were from tradition or legacy that could be more fun if they weren't. But the game's designed around them now, and it's like kind of a little late. Like, druids in with metal armor that they can't wear metal armor. Like, that is a restriction now, and you can't just remove it without boosting up druids' power level from doing so. But like, there were a lot of discussions of like, can we just get rid of this? Like, why do they need to not wear metal armor? And those just are always push and pull because people in the fan base like certain things. And to be honest, like the playtesters, some of the playtesters have come to me later and been like, I know that you guys were trying to change thing X, which we did try to make actually some pretty drastic changes. And that we in the playtest told you don't change thing X, go back to the way it was, and you went back to the way it was. And it's like, now that I've played the game for years and understand it better, I think you guys were right. You should have changed it. And I was wrong in the playtest. And I really actually appreciate people who do that because it's hard to like change your mind and admit to that directly. But I think that part of it is just it's hard to playtest a new game when people are just thinking of the way things happened in the old game. So you need some amount of tradition and hewing to that so that people don't just abandon you and think that you're just like ignoring everything they've seen before for no reason.
So I have a question. I'm not even sure. Someone wrote, if someone casts Burning Hands 2 feet or 2 inches away from a wall, is there a backblast like there might be with a Fireball spell? Does Fireball have a backblast?
They both don't say that they do. So that's something that your GM would need to
I didn't
decide.
think they did.
In Pathfinder First Edition and some old editions of D&D, in like really old editions of D&D, Lightning Bolt was bounced off of walls, and in Pathfinder First Edition, Fireball went out of its way to tell you that like if it hits metals with a certain melting point, here it is, the First Edition. Fireball sets fire to it can melt metals with low melting points such as lead, gold, copper, silver, and bronze. Like it had that line in it. When I was doing I was the one who did like pretty much the entire spell chapter revamp. So every spell there, like its initial text, I wrote. And when I was going through those, I was like, we're not going to fit the spells that we want in this book if we include sentences like that. In fact, we had to cut even more from it to fit the spells that we could fit, and we still couldn't fit Dinosaur Fort or a bunch of other spells. It was a lot of copy fitting headache to get that many spells in the game. It's like we could include lines like that. They're kind of fun to think about the fact that those are metals that would melt from fire, but also like how useful are they to you compared to having half the spells in the game. And so that just means the GM is going to have to decide, does Fireball melt a metal with a low melting point? Does it not? That's up to you.
We have a lot of questions that are big.
Let's see. I see a question about how are critical failures calculated. Is it failing by 10 or more or 10 less than the DC?
Oh, right.
Those are both the same thing because you succeed when you hit the DC exactly. Let's say the DC is 20. If you roll a 20, you made it. If you roll a 19, you failed by 1. If you roll a 10, you failed by 10. That is both 10 less than the DC and you failed by 10. Therefore, they are the same.
Yep.
Same number.
Yeah, it's just 10. 10 either way.
Yep.
Critical success or critical
easy math because you could just subtract from the tens place. That was one that was when I was proposing the degrees of success system. There was a lot of internal debate at the office of like, would that be too hard for people to do because you have to do math? And
so used to it by now.
They were also like the other designers were like, we think it might be too hard. Let's
it was
test
weird
it.
at first.
This is what playtests are for, right? I love that about the people I work with at Paizo is always like, let's test it, see what people think. My theory, which I think is borne out in practice, is that it only works because it was 10. Because you don't have to do addition or subtraction. Not really. You just look at the tens place and then up it, make it go up or down by 1. And so that's actually much easier. If it was like degrees of success were 9, then forget about it. That actually would slow down gameplay.
Well, plus, as I said, when I first started, it was a little weird, but I'm so used to it now. It's like, I don't even it's like breathing. I don't even think about it anymore. Let's see. I'm just trying to see. There's so many questions. I'm not trying to choose the best ones.
that we can both answer. Are we in Team Big Mook Squad or Big Boss?
I didn't understand that. Oh, I get it.
So I think I'm in Team Boss plus Lieutenants. So I'm picking a middle ground like I always do, but I'm actually serious about this. I like Boss plus Lieutenants because of the way that it adds a lot of legitimate thought and strategy to it. Like you could focus the boss to get the biggest danger off the field as soon as possible, but if you take out the lieutenants, they're probably easier to defeat, and then you're not suffering the full wrath of the encounter for as much longer. So I feel like they both have really legitimate ways to go about it, and you get to decide as a team how you're going to do it. And I like boss plus lieutenants.
Yeah, you don't want just one boss. The problem with one boss is that if you figure out the win more button, which is harder in Pathfinder Second, but if you do, it could just short circuit the whole encounter, which isn't fun. The only thing I don't have a problem with is what's it called? Where you send them back to their home plane.
A banishment.
A banishment, yeah, like banishment. Because man, it's like my guys use it all the time, and their saves are usually so high that they usually only manage to get banished on like a 4 or lower. It's like pretty low. It's only like a 10-20% chance. But if they get it, then that's okay. But that's a quick way to short circuit a big fight.
Well, plus banishment also, like, it's a plot hook for, it's like you let the bad guy get away. I mean, you sent them home, right, but they might come back and swear revenge later.
Right. So
and be like, you are the one who banished me. Like, Steven, I know that you talk a lot about how you read all of the Salvatore books about Driss. So Driss, heir to the Balor, and that Balor just had it in for him.
Right. Well, in the very beginning, right, in one of the very first books,
very beginning,
he sums him in a way. He goes, "Well, 99 years." He says it like 99 years might be a long time for humans, but for people, but for us, it is a blink of an eye, and I will be back. And he's like, "Uh oh."
Yep.
And I was like, "Yep." I remember that's in one of the very first books.
Yeah, it's an early one.
Yeah,
it's in the original trilogy.
Right. Well, that was with the Shattered.
So it starts with the Crystal Shard.
Crystal Shard, right? Because it was some evil demon or devil one of the shard. Balor, and he got rid of him. And he's like, I'm coming back. I'll see you in 99 years. It's like,
let's see. There's a question about recommendations for how to convert monsters or rebuild them from 5e to Pathfinder 2e.
Ooh.
So I recommend just read the Pathfinder 2e monster builder rules. And if you have a little trouble figuring out how to use the roadmaps from there or want a nifty guidance, go to rpgsuperstar.com. And there's a tool on there. And yes, like Steven is behind rpgsuperstar.com, so that is one of our websites. But there's a tool on there where you can start building your converted monster and say, oh, this is a big brute monster. It'll put in some like suggested guidance for the math for you. And the output winds up looking like a piezo output for a monster, kind of, which is kind of cool. So, just make a conversion. Use the rules from the Game Mastery Guide. Logan and I worked really hard on those rules, and I think that they work pretty well for converting or making a new monster. In fact, converting is easier because you don't have to come up with the concept. That's sometimes the hardest part, the first step, which is create a concept. You can just go through, figure out the math, and figure out how you're going to convert the special abilities. So I would say follow those rules. It'll get you in a good way.
So someone did ask, and I've seen this one a lot, if someone's unarmed, can they flank, or do they provide flanking?
Yeah, because it says within your reach. That whole thing about threatening does not even exist in Pathfinder 2, as long as you can act.
Yeah, everyone can threaten as long as it's like unarmed strike, you can bite. I mean, it's like everyone threatens from now on.
Here's what it says. You and the ally have to be able to act. You must be wielding melee weapons or be able to make an unarmed attack.
Right.
You can't be under any effects that prevent you from attacking. And you must have the enemy within your reach. So, for example, let's say that you were under like a compulsion of peace spell that I just made up. It says You can do whatever you want, except you can't attack. Then you can't flank. But if you, or let's say you're restrained, and restrained says the only things you can do is escape from being restrained. Then while you can still act to escape, you still wouldn't flank. But as long as you can act and you can attack, and they're within your reach, then you're going to be okay. By attack, I mean with a melee attack. Now, let's say that you uh, were in a situation where like you're holding a giant two-handed weapon that also like there's an ambiguous thing about fists and like using other body parts that like you generally can. But let's say that you are for some reason a creature that can't like it. You're living fists. You only are fists. You don't have any rest of your body. You're just two disembodied hands, like Master Hand from Super Smash Brothers, and you're holding a two-handed weapon that's a ranged weapon, and you can't make an unarmed attack. Then okay, fine. You don't flank, but you generally would be flanking in many cases.
I'm going to go backwards. Someone said, why does the aid action default to 20 instead of a level DC?
I mean, I'm a big fan of using a level DC, so I'd say use a level DC if you want. It was for simplicity that there was some thought among some people thought that it would be too complicated if you had to look it up. I like level DC for aid though, so I would definitely say if you want to do a level DC for aid, go for it.
Mm-hmm. Looking, there's a lot of general questions. Some of these are very big questions though. Dinosaur
Oh, I see a
Fort.
question about Thaumaturge. If you have cold iron weapon and they're weak to cold iron, and you do a personal antithesis, like what happens there? So I know there's been some confusion because of the fact that while I was still at Paizo, because I left Paizo like right before the Thaumaturge came out, so I was there for like 98% of the time, and it was already laid out in the book, but not the last 2%. And there were some adjustments that were made. So there a blog that was, and there was some that I was there while it was happening, but after the blog I wrote that said that we handled the situation where if you already have a really good cold iron weapon to fight the monster, then the thaumaturge ability isn't necessary in that case. However, some of the changes that were made, even while I was still there, that like to streamline how things worked in the thaumaturge, remove the fact that that was handled. So if the only reason you're thinking that it applies is because people are referencing that blog and saying, well, the blog said it's handled, so it must be handled. Yeah, that blog was written for an older version of thaumaturge. So it used to have some weird things that were in it that the blog references, of where you had like multiple choices of what you were going to do. It still has the choice between two weaknesses, but it had some choices that weren't weaknesses, and that the blog mentions, and that is not how the final version works. The final version is much better for a flow perspective, though.
So, some people have just general questions, but unfortunately, I know you don't have answers like, will there be more monk stances that are less tied to mystical and traditional martial arts in the future?
I mean, I can't
Don't
tell
know.
you anything about what's going to be in the future,
Yeah.
except for if it's going to be in one of Roll for Combat books. Because if I do know about Paizo things, and there's some things I do know because I write for Paizo, then I'm under an NDA, so I can't tell you. I see. Let's see. What is something you wish could have made it into Pathfinder 2e, but couldn't make it due to the complexity? And there's always a lot of things that that designers are excited to put in, but then get too complex or have other issues with them. Like I, for one, know that everyone hated resonance in the playtest, but it actually having a way to deal with consumable use such that you could make it so people can't just spam a literally infinite amount, or not literally infinite, but a nearly infinite amount of thousands of low level consumables on their budget at high levels, can allow you to make consumables more powerful in a way that I would have been excited to see more powerful versions of items that could not happen because you need a factor other than gold pieces to be the limiting factor on it. So that would have been a fun one. That wasn't really complexity that did it entirely. It was just generally like negative opinions about it. And I know some people afterwards have said that they now wish that there was resonance. And I thought Logan's idea of resonance was brilliant because of how it got around what seemed to be an impossible trap.
I liked it. I know. I think Eric Moda liked it too.
A lot of people were like, "This seems interesting. Let's play test it." And that was a case where, unfortunately, a lot of people,
They hated
playtesters, didn't like it.
They
So
hated it. I don't get it. I know why.
because it's a restriction, and
It's a
people are like, well, "I don't
restriction,
want
and
to
it
be."
and it was based on the number one dump stat in the game, which is charisma. So it was
Even
like,
if it hadn't been, that was that mainly just people were like, "Well, I can't believe that if I drank a healing potion, it might not heal me."
yeah,
And like they were like, we some people even were like, you could keep residence as long as it didn't apply to potions. And they're like, consumables are one of the main reasons that you want to have residence. Like, yes, it also restricted the number of times you could use like permanent items, but that's not a big deal because there's other limiting factors on that. Whereas consumables could be essentially unbound.
So Chase Street for $10 says, seems like Oracle's infamous for being a class a new players should not start with. Do you have suggestions to make it a bit easier to play and understand if a player has their hearts set on it?
I would say that it's like, it's in the advanced players guide. It's more of an advanced class. There's a lot of classes that came out after the core that have like are kind of infamous for being a little trickier for new players, like Summoner, because you've got two figures that are sharing your actions. Magus has like a whole spell strike routine that you have to figure out. You've got Oracle, which has its curse. That's a little complicated too. Inventor is a little bit complicated with dealing with unstable. Thaumaturge has more bits and pieces than a lot of other classes do. Like a lot of the newer classes are just a little more challenging. So I would suggest a simpler class, but if their heart is set on it, I think they can just play it. Like it is more complicated. Things you've been hearing are not wrong, but it's not like a deal breaker. If this is what they love, then it's going to work just fine. Like it is a workable class, even can be powerful, or in some cases, the most powerful. Burst healing, like how much can you heal right now in this one moment? Nobody beats a Life Oracle. Clerics can do more over the course of the day because they have that giant font of healing spells and they're not running out their other spell slots for that. But nobody beats Life Oracle at like this round. We need the most healing we can possibly have. What is that number? And Life Oracles are going to do it. So I would say just let them play an Oracle. Don't worry about it too much. Just like maybe go through with them and think about the curse that they pick and what the curse is incentivizing them to do. And then make sure they don't build a character who literally does the opposite of that. That's really the trap. Oracle is like Battle Oracle gives you penalties, can give you bonuses to fighting and penalties if you don't fight. So make sure they build someone who can fight because it's like if you attack, then it gets rid of the penalties from Battle Oracle. So it's possible to build an Oracle that would be really bad if you kind of go against the grain. I would say that's probably the main thing I would say to look out for.
Someone said my shelf looks heavy behind me, and
It is
I'm
heavy.
sure it's incredibly heavy. I would not want it to fall on me. Someone wrote, "It's the sudden boost of popularity of Pathfinder Second Edition. Seen a rise in third-party publishers supporting it as well. And if so, recommendations to look at for someone playing in the Galarian setting."
I mean, Pathfinder Infinite literally is allowed to use Galarian lore because
Yeah, they're the only ones.
they pay royalties to Paizo and of course Drive Through RPG because it's on there. So if you get something from Pathfinder Infinite, you will see not that it may even literally reference Galarian setting. So the person who asked about Geb books, when I said Paizo's not going to do one, probably that doesn't mean someone in Infinite won't. In fact, if you're the number one Geb stan, then maybe you can do the Book of Geb and put it on Pathfinder Infinite yourself. So anybody can. And that's the place to look for if you want something that's because the only third-party publishers, third-party publishers aren't allowed to set things in Golarian if they are not on Pathfinder Infinite. That's like a product identity of Paizo. So also, I would say that there are many third-party publishers that try to publish things that could be set in other settings or on Golarian if you want. And I make a concerted effort to do that with BattleZoo products. So you can check them out. For one, the Indigo Isles are a small island chain. So Steven made sure it's small enough you could just add it any ocean somewhere into any setting pretty much and just be like, this is
Mhm.
just this place that's there. But for like Year of Monsters, if you've seen it, you know there's a lot of lore, but it's not like world specific lore. And it's not like, oh yeah, these are 3 pages on like a nation in Alakar where you find a lot of stenodes. It's always lore that is focused on building cool characters and like conflicts, drama, or interrelationships between
Mhm.
people that you can put into any setting. And that I do that on purpose so that if you want it in Golarion, if you want it in Alakar, if you want it in Faerun, the Forgotten Realms setting, or wherever you want it to be, you should be able to easily insert these.
I want to know, did you ever consider having a minion or mook tag for late game? Like
I
having
mean,
like
not
the
really. I know people liked the 4E minion
I did.
tag, but I really didn't
Hmm.
because it made it so difficult to do a variety of by the way, okay, lots of people don't know what this is. So it is a creature that has legitimate offense for its level, but if it takes 1 damage, it instantly dies. So the problem with this is that splash damage, you couldn't do splash damage if you have this. You can't do like half damage on a successful save, or you can do like 4E did, where it's like if there's a success gives half damage, the minions just don't take it. They have to fail, which can weirdly make a minion actually sturdier than a non-minion if they keep succeeding on their save. Against multiple saves, a non-minion could have actually been killed uh, by taking half over and over again, whereas the minion would survive until it fails. It makes that one a little swingier. You can just say, oh, I guess they don't take splash damage. Oh, I guess they don't take half on these, but you have to make like a ton of excuses and different like exceptions. And I just don't think it's I mean, there is a minion trait and it's for things that are summoned or are literally under control of something else. But I don't think that having a trait that it just has 1 hit point is a good idea unless you can design the entire system around it.
So
That's just me personally. Now, you could make something that is for enemies that have higher offense than their defense. You don't need a special trait for that, though, right? You could just design a monster that is meant to be a minion monster that doesn't have 1 hit point, but maybe it only has half as many hit points as it's supposed to have for its level. But it has commensurately better offense because of Little Glass Kennedy. You should watch out for that, of course, because of the fact that doing that kind of trade off of defense for offense could make it way too dangerous. So you could also trade the hit points for like something else in the defensive side, but then you haven't really done what you wanted to of making it a minion.
so the person with the question about spell casting flat-footed that gave us specifics, they said they were a wizard carrying a quarterstaff,
Mm-hmm.
casting shocking grasp, and the enemy was flanked.
Yeah, they're flat footed against you.
There you go.
It doesn't even matter if you have the quarterstaff at that point, assuming the enemy on the other side was flanking with you,
Mm-hmm.
because it says the enemy was flanked, but
Mm-hmm.
you have to be one of the 2 people who was in that flank, right? Like if Steven and I are flanking it and you're off to the side doing shotgun grass, then you wouldn't get the flat footed. But
Wait, well,
otherwise, yes.
a lot of people keep asking, does the stunned character use reactions? No.
It just says the stunned character can't act. So during the time when they are stunned, the stun condition says you can't act while stunned.
Right. The
Using
other
reaction is part of acting. If you can't act, you can't use reactions or even free action.
another one that most
That's the
people
reason why I said that you're going to have to come up with your own equitable
Mhm.
interpretation of what happens if you're stunned on your own turn. And you had actions left that you could have theoretically spent to the stun. Personally, my home games, I would let you spend them, even though the rules don't say that. Normally, it only reduces it at the start of the next turn
Mhm.
because it just doesn't seem fair to get stunned one, but actually lose like 3 or 4 actions and your reaction.
Something else people always forget is you can't use reactions until you go. Um,
Uh, well, unless the GM determines that you were aware of the opponents in advance and
mhm.
that you were kind of ready for it.
Okay.
So it says that that's up to the GM. Um, Generally, I allow it when like one side is aware of the other side, or just they're talking and then suddenly it breaks out into a fight.
I see.
I'll give everyone reactions. But you're absolutely correct that normally you only collect your reaction with your 3 actions on your first turn of the fight. But there is a specific line that says at the GM's discretion you can.
Well, my discretion is they don't get it.
Yeah, well, that is at your discretion,
yes.
Stephen. You can be the stricter GM on that. And I'll be the
because at the much higher levels, it actually comes into play quite a bit.
I'll be the nice GM. I think
it's just easier.
We just got another couple super chats here.
We just got a whole bunch. Let's see. Well, a whole bunch. Tiger Eyes
started with a question about
Tiger Eyes
by Pathfinder Infinite.
Yeah, how do you publish for Pathfinder Infinite?
So if you want to publish for Pathfinder Infinite, I think you could just go to Pathfinder Infinite, which is is a sort of drive-through RPG place, and just make an account and do it. I think.
I've never done it myself, but I believe it's pretty simple. I
haven't done it myself either. I had an idea for a cool Infinite product, but it required some cooperation from Paizo as well. I was still at Paizo, and that never worked out. Where I was going to try to finish the medium class from Pathfinder 1E that was like 90% done in a really long form that was obviously too long, but that when I just started, I was writing and I was like, this is going to be too long. And Jason was just like, oh, keep working on it. But then he came back and he was like, it was too long. We need to make it shorter. So we made a shorter version of Medium for the final that was not the same as the playtest version. And people have been asking for years, like, what about that playtest version? I heard you were basically almost done with it. So I had thought I could finish it and publish it on Infinite. But obviously Paizo owns all of the words that I did before. And it was hard to get that agreement on that. So I haven't done it. But I think you can just go on there. And even there's art packs that they'll let you use for free. There's Paizo art if you do things on Infinite. So while you're paying them 50%, if you're not going to sell that many copies to begin with, the amount you save on art could be more. And I know that may sound dire that the amount you save on art could be more than 50%, but I'm not kidding. The amount you spend on art, if you buy art, could be more than 100% of the money that you make. You can lose money as a third party paying for the art. Very easily. Even if you write it yourself and don't pay yourself for the effort of writing it, and you lay it out yourself and don't pay yourself for the effort of laying it out, you can lose money just on the art. So getting art for free is a lot bigger than you think for a very small person.
Most companies don't spend what we spend on art. Would we spend Paizo, WotC, maybe a few others? It's time consuming, it's expensive, it requires a lot of hand holding, a lot of back and forth. It's a huge amount. It's a huge time sink and cost a ton. So let's see. Zakon sent $5. Can you make an impression on multiple NPCs without group impression? Or I think there's also group coercion.
Group impression is the one for making an impression. Group coercion is the one for using the coerce action.
Okay. And then example, chatting with 4 NPCs as a group for 4 minutes and then make 4 rolls.
Oh yeah, you absolutely can. Because then you're spending the 1 minute for each one. The main thing about group impression is that it lets you do it more efficiently. You can do it all together at once. Yeah. With a lot of these skill feats, they let you do it more efficiently. They may let you do it with an easier DC or whatever. But in general, there are rules for improvising a skill action that exist in the core rulebook, and they're not overridden by the existence of skill feat. Now, skill feats that just let you do it full stop are obviously more permissive than most GMs who would probably say if you're trying to do something more ridiculous that the DC shoots up. It might be a very hard DC. Or in this case, you give a great example. It's a bigger group, so it takes longer to make the impression on everybody because you have to kind of talk separately to different people or try to play. Even if you're giving one big speech, play to the crowd with slightly different. Lord so-and-so loves wine, is a famous wine person. I should make a reference to vineyards in this speech. So you can come up with different ways around it, but if you have the feat, you can just do it. No questions asked, no extra time, no extra DC. It just happened.
Yeah, and our game Seth has like every chat feat you can
Oh,
imagine.
outstanding. So he has the
Yeah.
one where he just automatically makes an impression on them
Yeah, he
right when
does
they show
everything.
up to a
And
social
he's got
event.
like a greater demon mask, which he uses, and he's
Oh
just, yeah,
no.
he's a pain.
That's hilarious. Let's see.
May
Josh
contain
Caron is
violence.
asking for $5. What are your thoughts on potential AI DM? I played a bit with ChatGPT. It does a pretty good job of character backstories.
Told
I
you.
mean, just in general, if you want to build video games have scripted like AIs that run monsters at the very least. That's what you expect from video games, and that's what you expect from computer games. So having an AI that runs monsters, I feel like is something that happens in every other game that's done on computers, and will probably happen at some point. I think AI as tools like that for the GM could have some really good value, right? Where it's just like you can turn on auto mode for monsters and the AI will run them, or you turn it to manual and you run the monsters. Think about that. That could give the GM more time to do some other things during the fight if certain monsters are on auto mode. Let's say like the mooks. You have a spellcaster who summoned like 8 mindless golems. It's like, well, my AI is pretty mindless, so I'll have them run the 8 golems, and I will only focus on the spellcaster. I'll run the spellcaster, and I'll give banter to the party, and just like my VTT will just kind of move the golems for me. And if they start doing something I don't want, I'll role play the spellcaster, be like, "No, you fools!" to the golems. What are you doing? Get back here! And maybe turn that one to manual that went the wrong direction and control it on the next turn or something like that. I could easily see it being a tool to assist a human GM. I think that the point in time where it can actually, with decent fidelity, be the entire GM for everything is not really there yet.
No, well, it's called the video game.
Yeah, you might as well play a video game where it's been coded in advance with hundreds of hours of people coming up with these something they know is going to be good, rather than just kind of let the AI try to come up with things and run it as best as it can, in a way that you would normally have a human. It's better to use it for tools.
Yeah, I don't know. I always
Um,
think about like when you call automated, answering those machines, and like used to be a time when I was a kid and you'd call someone and you get a human every time, and it's like now you always get a machine, and it's like I don't want to see the day where we're playing D&D or Pathfinder and it's always automated and it's an AI instead of a human, and you have to find or pay for humans now instead of just having it. So who knows? I do like your idea of having it automate like aspects of the
yeah,
game. So
automate certain aspects that the human GM decides that they want to automate.
mhm.
That's just a feature. That's convenient.
Yeah, that's
But
convenient.
having it be the only GM, I think I'd just rather play a video
It's a
game.
video game. May contain
Um,
violence, sent a super chat and says, I'm a 5e OSR GM introducing 2 to 3 16-year-olds and a dad to TTRPGs using the Pathfinder beginner box. Is there a steep learning curve? Any tips?
I think I'm biased. Obviously, I'm obviously very biased because, like, as you can see from this box, if it's not too glaring
We can
there,
see it. Your name's
they
right
can see
there.
it, and it says Mark Seifter. So I'm on the box. That makes me hugely biased. However, I think that we did a really good job at presenting something that does not have a huge learning curve. Also, I think it blurred me out when I put the beginner box there, so I'm going
There
to
you
do
go.
this. Yeah, now I'm sharper again. And that it really takes aspects and ideas from tutorial design that you can see in a lot of other games that you might not have thought of. Like in Mario, do you know how much time they put in like first Mario to exactly where things were on the first level so that you could understand what was going on in the game, and you would introduce each element and how you timed your jumps? They actually
How do you know that?
what?
How do you know that?
Oh, just I happened to read up about game design. There's a huge
Okay,
amount of
I've
engineering.
taken classes on that. Yeah, that 1-1 is like it's infamous. Is one of the hardest levels ever designed, ever.
1-1 was engineered specifically
Hmm.
so that like you would accidentally discover certain things
Correct.
about the physics of the game
Hmm.
and other aspects just by chance. And the beginner box for Pathfinder 2e also is engineered to try to help introduce new aspects slowly over time.
Hmm.
My biggest tip for you, if you're worried, if you're not worried, then don't even follow this tip. Do whatever you want. But if you're worried, don't be one of those GMs who I see a lot online that are perfectly fine if they're not worried, but it's not good if you're worried, who are just like, oh, sure, yeah, I know it's the beginner box, but you can definitely play your Kitsune summoner that has all these things from 20 different books that you built not using the beginner box rules in the beginner box. Because that is actually totally fine for the beginner box. It works great. They're the same rules, so it will not have any problems. And I love that people are doing that in the beginner box overall. But if you are simultaneously worried that it's going to be too complex, then make sure they build using the beginner box rules, because that will help. That will help a lot.
The beginner box is excellent. It's really easy to use. It's got a million. It's got a solo adventure. It is everything. It is the best beginner box. Only one that's even close to it is the Starfinder beginner box, which is also by Pies.
Starfinder one is really good.
They're both vastly superior to the 5e beginner box.
You said it, not me.
It's
on that one.
True.
Now, I will point out the 5e beginner box costs a lot less money, and they were not attempting.
But it's really poor. It's
into
really crappy content, though.
And that the original one with the Lost Mines from 5e, I've heard, is a very good adventure that's in it.
Oh, that adventure is excellent.
I've heard that's a great adventure.
Great
However,
adventure.
the other materials in the 5e box are not trying to be as high quality and as much as the PF2 box. That's why it costs half the price. So, like, they probably achieved what they wanted to with that beginner box. However, I will stand by the PF2 beginner box any day. And my big thing for this beginner box is that Jason had me research about trying to be able to get new players, and especially younger players or ones who are just picking up the game and don't know what an RPG is, to be able to understand what's going on. And I did some research in the field, and I discovered that physical representations of abstract concepts, especially when you're taking your turn, are important. And that's why they have little play mats in there where you can punch out tokens for your 3 actions and put them on there, and then you kind of pull them off to show that you've taken your action, so that you can physically do that. And that should allow your 16-year-olds will have no problem, but even younger kids can understand the 3-action turn more easily when they have the little chips and they're like, oh, I need to attack, I'll take this chip off. That helps them remember when it is, helps you internalize it faster. So that's like, obviously everyone on that beginner box did a lot more than one thing, but I would say that's the one that that's what came out of like a weird research stint that I did for the box, and I think it's going to be very helpful.
So anyhow, he likes the beginner box. Anyhow,
yes.
Back to the next. We have
what's the next question?
Well, we had Nicholas Paradise. He'd send us the chat again because he said his cell phone ate his chat.
Fate 20 was before that though, right?
I know, but I'm just saying he sent one. And then Roker Zero just came up and joined us with a whole bunch of people. We have
nice.
King Fate
Welcome,
20
Roker.
said $5. I'm new. So with the new spell hearts, I gotta know, why do activate cast spell items still use the fixed DC instead of the caster's DC? Wow, it's come full circle. Didn't we already answer that one?
Yeah, we kind of already answered that. It's just the same reason in general. Like you are picking up a lot of things when you get a spell heart, and so they wind up using the fixed DC for the same reason that other items use a fixed DC.
Chase Street said for $5. Kitsune has been mentioned, which makes me ask, where is the canine dog ancestry? Cat people are nice, but where's the love for dog? There is a dog ancestry.
There's a Shuni, but it's pug only. If you look into Pathfinder First Edition, there's the Rougarou, which is also a dog.
Well, there's Beastkin, and you can be anything.
Beastkin can be any animal, but for specifically dogs, Shuni and PF2 are pugs, and Rougarou from PF1 are, I think, any dog, or they may have some other specifics on their dogitude. So there's actually multiple dog options that are out there. One for PF2 though.
Yeah, but you could change the Shuni around if you wanted to. The funny thing is, I asked if the Shuni was made a pug because Eric Mona owns a pug, And they said it was just coincidence. Because he got the
It
pug.
was really coincidence. He got Xerxes
Right, he got after.
after it happened.
Right. Which is, or was he influenced by the shooting? Who knows? But
I don't know. It's like it's weird though because like the amount that Eric is tied to like the Isle of Kortos, which is where Shuni are from.
mhm.
You would almost think that it was connected, but it really wasn't. I was there at Paizo, and it really wasn't connected, and it's one of those weird coincidences of the universe.
We got a lot of questions that we did not get to. We'll try to get to some of these are very long questions, like how do I convert my 5e game to a Pathfinder game? I'm like, that's like a whole topic.
Yeah, there are also shorter ones like why did the thaumaturge reactions only work for the creature that you're exploiting on? And the answer is because that's the one you're focusing on. Like
people also said they don't like War Priest. They say it's worse than Cloistered. And
I mean, the difference, but the problem with War Priest overall, just honestly, the problem with them as a sub, sort of as a doctrine, as a sort of a subclass, is that what people wanted War Priest to be probably was just something that is actually broken in the system, which would be if it had martial weapon proficiency and still had all of the spells with a lower DC. And like unfortunately, because of the attempt to like make martial caster kind of a little more fixed so that both martials and casters can flourish, you can't really support a caster that has all of that offense while at the same time all that offense from melee while also having all of their spells. War Priest is actually a perfectly solid doctrine, but it doesn't do what you expect it to do. What it's solid in is actually its ability to not be killed. Because of its getting fortitude saves to go from successes to critical successes and getting master in fortitude, and because of having its armor without having to jump through a ton of hoops, and people are like, well, you could theoretically do the same thing if you take just the right feats and you get all of those up, but by that point the War Priest has spent their feats on something else, and they can it could be shoring up their defenses even more, or it could be branching out.
So before we
the
get
problem
to
is people want offense. They want to smack you and they want to destroy you with their weapon, and that's not what it gives. So I think that its main sin is a failure to meet the expectation of what people want it to be, possibly because that thing that they want it to be is not something that PF2 can handle.
yeah, I know where you're coming from.
If there was a new class that was like a Magus-like caster, but with divine spells, like that only had like 4 slots or however many, the smaller number of slots that Magus has, then that could be a different situation.
So I'll get to that in one sec, the super chat, because I got a very good question here. What's the deal with the Battlesu Dragon ancestry? Is it balanced, and how does it work?
Oh wow, that's an amazing question. Where did that come in? I didn't even see that.
Baron Blackwater wrote that. We get that a lot. We get that question quite a bit.
Yes. So the Battlesu Dragon ancestry, which you can see some art of above there, is a new ancestry that was written by Mark Seifter. I guess that's me. That is a giant book that is an entirely one ancestry. So we've had a ton of people playing it. I have worked in some capacity, either as the author or as a designer who did a design pass on it, on every ancestry that Paizo has released to date, except for Kashrishi. That's the only one that I have not worked on because they were not done writing for Impossible Land at the time when I left Paizo to join Roll for Combat. But I decided to put those talents to work to create the largest ancestry ever made. And it is balanced scrupulously against other ancestries while still having cool and outrageous draconic abilities. Now, there is one thing that you need to understand, which is it has a lot of feats and options. So from the sort of standpoint of, well, my party allows ancestry paragon, so we get twice as many feats. Dragon is going to seem good because even though every feat individually is balanced, there's so many of them that you're not going to run out. Whereas if you use a Paizo ancestry, they don't have a lot of space in their ancestries. One thing I tried to get more space at Paizo, but there was never enough space in books. Like for Lost Omen's Ancestry Guide, I was like, can we have more pages per ancestry? And everyone said, yes, Mark, because I gave a kind of a presentation on why they needed more pages. And everyone was like, that's right. Okay, we'll give them more pages. Then they saw how many would fit, and they said, never mind, Mark, we're taking back the pages. So your dragons might be a little bit juicier just because they don't run out of feats to tank. But if you have other ways to get feats, like let's say use the versatile heritage or something like that on your other ancestries, it kind of evens out. And all of the feats are balanced. If you want something super strong, you have to use your class feats on it by using the dragon archetypes that are in the book. So, like, I use my skills from creating the game to make a dragon that actually works. And if you're wondering how can it be a dragon and be balanced, how does that make any sense? That's a huge story beat. Like I was saying earlier in the stream, I try to write for Battle Zoo in ways that has tons of lore, but that are not setting specific and that are instead provoke your thought provoking and make you kind of think, how does this work and what will this cause in society? And so I created a societal sort of schism for dragons over the use of a ritual that lets you become stronger faster, but in the short term kind of resets your magic. And that is sort of the crux of the lux. That's the crux of the way that these dragons work as an ancestry.
Ooh. So,
I saw a question from Labib Saad that says, will we ever get Great Worm type dragons in Battle Zoo Bestiary? And I would say no, because Battle Zoo Bestiary is based only on RPG Superstar entries that are done by people who write them, and someone would have to submit a Great Worm. Now, Steve and I love Great Worms because they're the strongest dragons from D&D and traditionally in Pathfinder, but Pathfinder 2 doesn't even have Great Worms for the chromatic and metallic dragons. I doubt anyone's going to enter a Great Worm into RPG Superstar and then win. I guess if they did, can't. Like, we'd have to figure it out. But that feels like it would be its own different product, if, not a Battle Zoo Bestiary to me, if it had Great Worms.
I'm going to just say, if you like Great Worms, and who doesn't like Great Worms? If you want to see a level 25 red dragon and in its full glory, and more importantly, giving it the space and love that it deserves, because the reason you can't really do a Great Worm in the RPG Superstar is you can only go up to 600 words, even including lore. It won't fit. It just won't. It's just dragons are beyond the most complex monsters to do. You have Great Worm. That's
even
it.
If you think it could
that's
fit
the hardest monster.
By referencing the bestiary, the secret is to make a Great Worm. You would need to include the Draconic Spellcaster's sidebar with the new spells for the Great Worm, because that's a required thing when you're making a dragon. So you would lose from that sidebar needing to be.
You basically need 2 pages for a Great Worm, at least a page and a half, probably 2, and you just don't have it. Now, does that mean we might be doing Great Worms? Maybe one day. Maybe sooner than you think. Maybe, if you really like dragons. And go back to that question. Dragon Ancestry has been bought by thousands and thousands of people, both for Pathfinder and 5e.
Yeah, I heard that. Steven, is it tens of thousands yet?
It's not tens of thousands, but it's many thousands.
That's awesome.
And I will tell you, I've heard exactly 0 complaints. I don't see anything.
I've heard a few small ones.
Okay, that's fair, and that's totally fair. But like, I go
to places where I see them where people are like nonstop complaining about Paizo products all day.
But I'm talking about like in our own, because sometimes we get questions about how things work or adjustment, and if I can within time, we'll adjust it in our book.
Yeah, we'll fix it. We were able to fix almost everything from when we did the PDF release before the hardcover release.
Yeah, and like for example, Jewel the Indigo Isle is still in like I call it version 0.09. It's out, but people, because it's so gargantuan and so complex, I'm asking people to give me feedback, and people have been finding things, mostly typos, that I've been fixing. But if they do find something like, someone actually did say something. I'll tell you later, Mark, but someone did say something that it was someone's background was weird, and so I removed it and both products because I agreed with them. I'm like, yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. That is a weird
I've seen a
background.
few small things here and there. And even then, sometimes when I see them, other people
Hmm.
who have it are like, well, I have this book. And
Hmm.
no, this hasn't been an issue for us. And here's why. And they will
Yeah,
have a discussion and it'll be a polite discussion. And sometimes the person's like, oh, okay, maybe we overthought it. I'll just have us try it again for a little while. And they
so
usually don't come back and say that it still was a problem. So I'm hoping that means that it worked out well for people.
but the point is, it's been played quite a bit now. I actually have it in one of our games. It's balanced, man. I know it doesn't sound like it could be, but it is very well balanced. The flavor is amazing. Everyone loves it. It's like the proof is in the pudding. If you don't believe us, just go to Reddit, ask people there, and they'll give you your honest opinion. So you don't have to take our word for it. But it works. And it would really be good if we could just expand that Dragon Book and give people more options one day. I'll tell you, one day would be a nice thing. Let's see. Cogbuster 3, very first super chat. Why do so few conditions affect reflex saves? Clumsy, unconscious do, but flat footed, immobilized, etc. don't, which can be a bit unintuitive. You know what? I had that question too, Mark. I've noticed that it's almost nothing affects a reflex save. It's
I mean,
actually
a decent number do. So
they've never
here
seemed
are
to come
ones
up.
that affect reflex saves: clumsy, unconscious, frightened, sickened. Those all affect
Well,
reflex
frightened
saves.
is bad. Frightened affects everything.
Yes, those all affect reflex saves.
Yeah.
Fortitude saves are just drained, frightened, and sickened. So that's less. That's fewer.
Right.
That's 3 and not 4.
Right.
I think the will saves is stupefied, frightened, and sickened. So that's again 3 and not 4. So in fact, more things affect reflex saves than either of the other two saves. Now, it is true that immobilized does not. And the reason why it doesn't is that immobilized is a very specific condition that is created to mean you cannot move from your space. Why can't you move? There could be a number of different reasons. If an effect is supposed to not only mean you can't move from your space, but also mean that you're bad at reflex saves and other things, and you're easy, like you might want to add the clumsy condition to that also. Like make it, if an effect is like, now you are slow and lethargic and you can't move from your space, you are immobilized and clumsy, you can do that. But the reason why immobilized doesn't do that is that it's meant to be a pure condition that just says you can't move from the space, that can be used anytime you can't move from the space, whether there's time magic involved, so every time you try to walk out of the space you loop back like like an infinite loop on the other side of that 5-foot square and you just get stuck in there, or there's like a force field in the space. Some of those would affect your reflex saves, maybe in your head canon, and some of them wouldn't. So that's why, just the same reason why fleeing as a condition does not have like the fear descriptor, because it just means you're moving away. That could be because maybe you were pushed back or something like that in some very weird way. It probably doesn't.
You know what?
But it's just a descriptor of running away.
By the way, someone said their only complaint with Battlezoo Ancestry Dragons is they didn't have time to read it yet. And someone else,
I mean, that is a decent complaint. I have seen the mock complaint of that it was too good, but now they'll never play any other Ancestry.
That one I've actually
seen that multiple times.
I see that a lot. I see people.
I know I'm the author, so it's weird to say that, but I'm only saying that because literally a bunch of people have said that joke like so many times that I've now just seen it over and over.
Because there's 45 dragons in this book, and they're all awesome. And it's like playing classes. It's like, okay, I got to play a Havoc Dragon. Now I want to try a Gold Dragon. It's like you always want to try. There's different because they play very differently.
The funny thing is, Steven, there's 45 dragons in the book.
Yeah.
I still keep getting people saying, where are the other 4 Leshy dragons? You only have Toadstool.
Well,
so it's like
I know.
45 dragons. Why did they need 4 more dragons?
Because we had to draw the line somewhere, and it was an experiment, and we did one with Ginny D to make sure it was done okay. And not all of them have 5. What's that? The Imperials? Do they have 9? Who has 9?
Who has 9? Planar.
Planar has 9.
That's actually why it adds up to.
That's why the number's
45.
Weird. Yeah, that's the problem.
Otherwise, 45 would not be a would not be possible when you have one toadstool dragon on its own, but 9 plus 1
Guys,
equals
it was
10.
going to be like 20 or 30 originally, and it just kept growing.
So my initial plan, if we really want to know, it was 10.
10. It was
When
going
I
to have
pitched it to Steven, Steven was like, "Oh, we've got Battle Zoo Bestiary. Mark, you did a great job on the monster parts. What's next?" And I said, "Okay, so after the Kickstarter that's only for Battle Zoo Bestiary, let's do Dragon PDF, and we'll start it with just chromatic and metallic dragons. But if it's popular, I can do it for primal dragons, and I can do it for each family of dragons. We can expand it with smaller PDFs, like maybe every month, with like add some more dragons."
Mm-hmm.
Steven's like, "Okay, all right, cool." He was like, "How many pages do you need for that?" And I was like, "Well, I think it would probably. I know this seems like a lot, but there's a lot of information on all of these dragons. So I might need like 30, like that 30 to 40 pages, even though ancestries are like never more than like 8 or 10." And Steven's like, "Okay, sure." And then next thing I know, Steven's like, "I'm putting it in the Kickstarter." I was like, "That's great." And I looked at the Kickstarter and it said it was going to be over 100 pages, and that was hardcover, and then it had all of the dragons. And I was like, "Wow, that's awesome." Like, I only thought we were going to do it after the Kickstarter, it'd be short, but now it can have everything I ever dreamed of putting into the dragons all at once, and that's what it is.
Just by the way, a few things. People are saying this is not Dragonborn. See that? You're a dragon, man. You're a real dragon.
But there is a draconic scion heritage that you can take with other ancestries.
There's so
to build
much
your
in this
dragonborn,
book.
but it
It's
can
crazy.
be an elf dragonborn.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Isn't that awesome? I mean, some people can't decide whether they want to be an elf or a dragonborn, but you can kind of be both if you're a draconic scion elf.
By the way, we do answer. So the good news is we always give you very long answers to your super chats, so we make sure you get your money's worth. Bad news is we don't get to everyone's questions. There's a lot of questions.
There's
I'll probably
two more
do this.
super chats.
I will definitely do this again because Mark and I were like, this might go short. We might not have that many questions.
That like almost 200 people were going to show up to talk with me here.
Well,
like I do these kind of things on my own stream with Linda, which not only has me but also the head of all of narrative and adventures for Paizo. And we do not get 200 people, so I am very happy about this. I love doing
on Tuesdays.
I could do a Q&A all the time, as long as people are asking awesome questions like this and not like rules adjudication on ambiguous rules.
And the rule stuff.
And you heard me at the beginning, and you didn't ask those kind of questions.
No, I don't think we got a single rules question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Rage, the Promised End wrote, "Do you guys have PO box to send fan stuff? Also, you need to do the Great Gummy Worm." I actually have an answer to both of those. So I don't have a P.O. box, but if you look in all of our books, there's a address right there. You can send any fan stuff to that address, 16 Continental Road. It's not even a P.O. box, so you can send it right there. That's our company address. So any of our products, every one of our products has their address. And I think our emails have the address too. By law, you have to have that in there. So that's where you can send fan stuff. You send me fan stuff, I'll put it on the shelf. If it's appropriate, I'll put it on the shelf and everyone can see. And the Great Gummy Worm. So, okay, food stuff. I actually know stuff about food. You got to be careful with food stuff. Chris Beamer, who's one of the regulars on our show, he actually works for Cisco and he sells food. So I actually know a lot about this. He and I talk all the time. But if we ever did something, you know what? Critical Hit Cookies, who's a big fan of the show, and she sells
cookies are awesome.
She sells amazing cookies. I bet you I could partner with her and do.
You mean to make a gummy worm cookie that is known as the Great Gummy Worm,
or a worm cookie, or a dragon cookie? I'll talk to her. She's in New Jersey, and she's a huge fan of the show. And if we do something, maybe I'll partner with her, and we'll do something with her.
I mean, that could definitely be cool.
Yeah. She has a
zoo cookies, great gummy worm.
Yeah, something like that.
She definitely makes cookies that will just
they're amazing.
That will throw in ingredients you don't expect.
Oh yeah,
like I would not expect a gummy worm in a cookie, but I bet she could. Yeah. I mean, maybe there's a technical reason that they would melt or something like that.
Also, it's because it messes up. You know when chewy gummy with soft, because then it messes up your mouth.
That's a fair point.
I personally wouldn't want to
eat it.
I don't think I would do a gummy worm, but trust me, there's other things we can do.
Fair enough.
But that's not a bad idea. I say actually that's a very good idea. Someone who has a Russian name, which I cannot pronounce for the life of me. I think it's Russian, or at least a Cyrillic alphabet. Why do monks? Sorry, why monks don't have unarmed legendary proficiency? Bah. They don't. They don't get legendary proficiency for
Yeah, they
unarmed.
don't
Huh.
because only fighters get.
Oh, you're right.
Only fighters get legendary proficiency
Yeah, that
in
seems a little
offense.
bad. That seems a
Monks get
little
it in
OP.
defense.
Yeah,
But the reason why is because monks get other advantages.
they're pretty powerful monks.
They are actually very strong. If
Yeah,
they also had legendary and unarmed attacks, they would be ridiculously too strong.
We have two in our games, and they are really good.
I think that the name is Bratstvo Shukachiv
Wow.
Chiaku.
Oh my god.
Or Brotherhood of Pathfinders.
Holy crap. You get a hero point, Mark.
Hooray. Good work, Google Translate.
Oh god. I take back that hero point.
You can't. It's too late.
Warwolf for $5 wrote, how hard is it to homebrew characters? I want to take my own lycotropes from the book series I'm writing. Well,
so
what do you mean by
I would
homebrew?
say that it's not too difficult to homebrew a character, as in like NPC. But if you want to make an ancestry, well, I mean that can be tricky. However, you could try to use Beastkin versus All Heritage as a starting point for your lycanthropes and see where you can go from there. It's easier when you start from a particular starting point.
I mean, there's also you know what I would do? I have a different take on this, Mark. I would look at Infinity and see if anyone did something like a lycotrope, or if there's something similar to what you want, and use theirs instead of you trying to figure it out. Or at least
that's definitely the case, but
yeah,
it sounded like they had maybe their own take on them.
But I'm use it as a basis.
Yes, use it as a starting point. Yeah. You could use Beastkin or the one from Infinite as a starting point, depending on what you want.
Especially if you're new.
And if you have a starting point, it's actually really easy to mod TF2 compared to making something completely up on the fly. And once you get more familiar or comfortable, I think you will be able to make things up on the fly. I'm a little more optimistic on that than Steven. I saw some people in the chat when the two of us sort of disagreed on how easy it is to make stuff up for yourself, that they were doing it for Jade Region, and they agreed with me that once you learn it, that for your own group, it's easy enough to make something that won't be busted too much that it will cause a problem at your table. It's a lot harder to make something that's great content for everyone's table, from like Paizo level or Battle Zoo level content.
Yeah, you have to remember, Mark and I look at this all day. This is all we do. I'm constantly reading and fine-tuning, and we are doing it at a level that I consider I'm trying to be the absolute highest level quality, like A++ level. So I have a very hard standard. So take that with a grain of salt. Like when I look at things, I even when I hear homebrewed stuff, or when I hear, I can't help but not try to think of how it should be done correctly, and
I have a designer brain in my head too, Steven, but you just kind of have to ignore that.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right.
Because for their table, it's probably going to be fine.
You're completely right. But keep in mind, even on my table, my table's a bad table. I have lawyers. I have Vanessa Hoskins on my table. We have professional designers on my table. So it's like
your table could run into more issues. But yes. Like the way I'm thinking of it is have you ever heard the story that you hear all the time of people who come online and are like, I know everyone says certain class is very strong, but the one in my group is just really weak. Like that's been true in every edition of every game I've ever played. Like you'll find people being like, yeah, I know you're all saying fighter or cleric are very strong, but the one in my group is weak. So for their group, if they gave some really bustedly powerful item busted overall, but not for their group, to that fighter or cleric, it might be necessary to make that character do well. Like only a person who's running that game knows how their players and characters interact. Obviously, if you give that to the fighter or cleric and then they overshine everyone else in the party, maybe you shouldn't have done that. But if that's what it takes to bring them up to par so everyone's having fun and it feels like they're all working together well and are balanced with each other, then sometimes that can happen even with something that, yeah, technically is not an A plus plus item for a publication.
All
That's
right.
my thought on it.
Wow, we've been doing this for almost 2 hours. Let's crank through some of these and then wrap it up because I didn't realize how long we've been even doing this. I guess it's fun. Um, let's see. Do we have? Well, I do wish we can have mythic level players for the dragons I'm building with Battle Zoo.
Well,
So
I mean, until Paizo does something like Mythic, I don't think that but we have the expertise at Roll for Combat to do something as ridiculously intensive as the Mythic system, but we're not the right people to
I
do
wouldn't
it.
do Mythic.
Paizo are.
Yeah, I wouldn't do
Because they're
Mythic.
the ones who did it in Pathfinder First Edition, and it's for a niche of only people who want that particularly high level content.
But worms is a different story.
Because those are monsters. Those are already in the game.
Correct.
That I mean, the fact that they exist is in the game, and the rules you need to make them are in the game. They just aren't in the game.
Yes, that's a whole different story because high level monsters have a lot of holes and niches to fill, and they can be used in a lot of different ways. Mythic level play is way too niche, unfortunately. New player from 5e here. If I had a Thermomage with the Tiger Stance unarmed strike, would the bleed damage from a crit be affected by the weakness of exploit vulnerability? Holy crap, Mark, you have to answer that one because I don't even know what's going on there.
So would the bleed damage from a crit be affected by the weakness from exploit vulnerability? So if you look at the Thaumaturge's exploit vulnerability, and I don't find the answer immediately, I'm going to have to tell you ask your GM, because that is what I said at the beginning of the episode. It says here that we can put on a personal antithesis, or we can put on the other effect. Let me look up personal antithesis. That's the one that we're talking about here, because obviously, if the monster actually literally has a weakness to bleed damage, then it literally has a weakness to bleed damage. So if we put on personal antithesis, the creature and only the creature gains weakness against your unarmed and weapon strikes equal to 2 plus half your level. So it says it gave weakness to your unarmed and weapon strikes. It did not necessarily say it was giving weakness to bleed damage or some other damage that they're taking later on. So that would be potentially something that you and your GM could decide whether or not that damage is actually the strikes damage or whether it's the persistent damage. My money personally as the GM is that it's not the strikes damage, because even though the strike applied the persistent damage is happening afterwards. And you could separately have a weakness to the persistent damage if you say we're weak to fire and you got lit on fire. Persistent fire damage, but that would not be the same as the strikes damage. But that is my personal interpretation, and your GM may rule otherwise. The question that comes down to is this damage your unarmed and weapon strike?
So, question is, are there any house rules you'd recommend for people coming from 5e over to Pathfinder 2e?
Okay, so my number one recommendation for a house rule for people coming from 5e over to Pathfinder 2e is to try it for a bit without using a house rule. And look, I get it, because I love house rules. I always use house rules. I've used them in every edition of every game, and that even includes Pathfinder 2e, the game that I wrote a large percentage of, along with my other 3 co-authors, right? But I'm a game designer, so I always do it. And if you do want to use house rules, that's okay, and I will not judge against you. But my recommendation is to try it without, so that you know what it's going to be like without it, because I think that's going to let you make cooler and more effective house rules when you actually make them than if you just throw some on right away. That's as a kind of eternal tinker and house roller. That's my personal opinion. However, if you want to use the variants from the Game Mastery Guide, those are kind of like house rules that the house is my house, because I wrote all of those variants for the Game Mastery Guide so that you could know that someone who designed the game looked at it and made sure it was something that could work. So if you want to do something that's not standard, I would start with the Game Mastery Guide variant rules, because those are at least ones that we've looked into with the design team. Even then, you may want to run it a few times without any of those. Just see what the baseline is, understand what you're changing, make better house rules after that.
And by the way, the person who asked that rules question said they were sorry and that they
Oh yeah, no problem. It
they
wasn't
sorry they didn't
immediately
realize they weren't
obvious.
supposed to ask a rules question.
It wasn't immediately obvious whether it would be an interpretation question or whether it was directly in the class. I had to look myself to see what the exact wording
Mhm.
was, and it wasn't. So it wound up being a interpretation. That's I'm not blaming anybody for doing it. I'm just pleasantly surprised that a high percentage of questions definitely weren't rules questions.
They said the great gummy worms tell me there's going to be a gummy Eldamon. There could be cookie Eldamons. I don't know about gummy Eldamons.
I could see that.
I actually
That would
hate
be
gummies,
hilarious.
so that's my big.
Eldamon themes. Imagine
Yeah.
if you had like a different recipe of cookie for every element. That's obviously too
Oof,
many to actually make,
too many.
but that would be cool, right? It's like the ice one could have like a some kind of a mint theme to it, and like you could maybe make the cookie a little spicy for fire somehow. Do
Uh,
some like weird flavors.
People want to know your personal channel, Mark. If you can give
Yeah.
everyone.
So I'm Arcane Mark. That is twitch.tv/Arcane Mark. Is a channel shared between
You
myself
can
and
type it
Linda
in.
Zayas Palmer, who is the over leshy who rules over narrative adventures and all those things for all of Paizo. So like we work together on Arcade Mark to just do a variety of topics that basically are decided by the viewers for later episodes. We just yesterday, so it's still on there, did one about adding mascot characters to your game and like what does it mean to be a mascot character and how can you handle those. And on Saturday, we're going to build a victory point subsystem, like not an example of a chase or something from a system, but the entire subsystem starting from a concept that is decided by chat. So chat will make decisions of what they want us to do, and we'll just be building them. So
And
that's
what time?
twitch.tv/arcane mark. We are at 7 p.m. Pacific on Tuesdays. That's 10 p.m. Eastern. And we are 10 a.m. Pacific on Saturdays, which is 1 p.m. Eastern. But, Linda and I are planning to try to move somewhere less expensive. If we wind up moving to the East Coast, maybe we can pull back those times a little bit. I know they're a little late for East Coasters.
Mm-hmm. And then this channel, I mean, I go live whenever. For whatever
Steven,
reason,
I just never know. Is it like, can I get lunch? Are we having a show today? It's
whatever.
past 11. He's like, no, we're having one at 12.
Well, the thing
12
is,
for me, 3 for him.
well, I used to have it at 2 on Wednesdays, and for reasons just because of timing and scheduling, I've moved it to 3, and it's either 2 or 3 on Wednesdays usually. And I've been really sick, so I would have done more shows. Oh, Werewolf wanted to know, or Warwolf, how close are the beastkin to the lycanthropes? Is a super chat.
So, and I answered it in chat, but given that you mean were creatures, because lycanthropes, the word lycan means wolf, and D&D has always just said, oh yeah, the were bears and the were tigers are all kinds of lycanthropes, but in Pathfinder 2, we kind of moved to like correct terminology and are only calling werewolves lycanthropes. So assuming you mean are they like were creatures, the answer is they are. It says in their description that they are were creatures. They're ones who are like not overwhelmed by the curse, and they have some slightly different features about them, but they're a type of were creature.
We have another super chat. This is a good one. You won't know about this one though. But Jeremy McCutcheon for $4.99 said, some type of cookie with bacon for the circus group, a spicy one, and extra dark chocolate, and no ID for the last one. That's because, well, in real life, Rob Tremarco is known as Bacon Golem. That's his like handle. And he loves bacon, and his house is covered with things of bacon. And, like his entranceway has like a sign about bacon. So he's all about bacon all the time. So we always talk about bacon on the show. So obviously his cookie would be a bacon cookie. The spicy one would be Hap because she is literally on fire. She's literally part elemental, so she's on fire. Extra dark chocolate, that'd probably be Acheron because he's from the Duskwood and he's like all dark and mysterious. And then the last one's Vanessa, who's a Havoc Dragon. So I would think that would be like some cookie that was like a mixed up cookie with like just it's a whole hot mess. It's like a hot mess of a cookie. It's like got a little bit of chocolate chips. It's got a little bit of oatmeal in it. It's got a little bit of sugar in it. You're like, what is this thing? It's like three
It
cookies in one.
probably also has just something that has a lot of different colors in it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It would be like
Randomly
totally.
that you
Yeah.
wouldn't
Just
expect a
random.
cookie. Like not M&M cookies, people do that, but like Skittles.
Yes.
Like nobody
Weird.
puts Skittles in their
Weird
cookies,
cookie.
but a
Yeah,
Havoc
weird.
Dragon probably would.
Yeah. Chase Street for $5 said, just curious if you have thoughts on the Pathfinder 2E version of Sandy Peterson's Cthulhu mythos, such as the archetype and ancestries therein. I actually have that book. Have you seen that book? It's huge. It's like 500 pages.
I've heard that it's really long.
It's so big.
I don't actually like know a lot about it.
I haven't, and I didn't really look at it that closely. Strangely, I'm always amazed when they come out with these 500, 600 page Pathfinder books out of nowhere, because I'm like, where are these people coming from? And then they just
converted it from something else,
right?
I know.
I know. They converted it from something else because like we like are like fine tuning every word in our books, and like it's like even our conversions are so fine tuned that it's not. I don't feel like we just take something and just convert it. We literally hand make everything of our books so carefully. So it looks cool. I have the book, but I have not looked at the archetypes and ancestries. If Mark talks, I can open it up real quick and take a look.
There you go. Well, let's see. Yeah, it looks like Werewolf does use the D&D-ism of lycanthropes, even though Lycos is wolf. Anthrop is human, so we were correct on answering that question. Awesome. So let's see. What else do we have in terms of questions that are around here? Can Leshies be evil? Yes, Leshies could be evil. Like nature can be very very brutal sometimes and be all about like you could have an evil Leshy that just is going around killing other creatures, or that is just going around devouring. Like you could have like a fungus Leshy that is just gluttonous and is like creating corpses to like create compost for a delicious meal for their fungi. Like whatever you want. Like just because they're a one of the vitae, like nature spirits that are embodied, doesn't mean that they're good. They're neutral on average, but they could have any alignment.
I'm trying to find the Cthulhu book. Problem is I have too many books. Let's see. Why do some advanced weapons have the monk trait? Monks don't have proficiency with advanced weapons.
Just in case, future proofing. If it seemed monkish, people put it on there.
Yep, I found my Cthulhu Mythos book.
You
575 pages.
That's a lot of pages.
That is too many pages, man. Even I'm just like, that is a lot. I mean, how did they even lay this thing out?
That is a lot of pages. 575.
That's a lot.
On a setting. Let's see. Is that longer than it? How long do you think Mage the Ascension Anniversary Edition, 20th Anniversary Edition is?
Mage?
Yeah, Mage, like the White Wolf one.
I know. I actually don't even know what I don't know. How big is it?
698 pages.
I've never even read. I never read Mage. I read like Vampire, obviously. I have no idea what's even in that.
I've actually run Mage 20 and I haven't read all 698 pages because it's long and it's very difficult to reference. But you don't need to read all 698 pages to run.
I know, that's the thing. I'm just curious. I'm looking. I can't find. There's like player option. Oh, here we go. I'm just curious. It's hard just to find what's in here. Player options. Whoa, they got some crazy stuff here. Dreamland familiar dedications. They have a they have a feat here called "Who's the Master?" Like your pet is the master of you. It's like great. extra
People are coming
familiars.
up with cookie ideas like body elemental cookie is meat. It's just meat.
Someone said how big the CRB is. They're like the CRB, but that's a core rule book. That's not a support book.
I mean, maybe to Cthulhu people, their Cthulhu book is the core book of Cthulhu.
It is. It's so big. I can't
Core of
believe it.
Cthulhu.
I'm like, well, I'm just amazed because it's like they have a whole thing here, like how to redo druids, how to redo fighters, rangers, rogues. It's very impressive. Sorcerers, wizards. I mean, they did everything. I mean, this book is. You would think it would have gotten a little bit more press. I mean, I knew it. It kind of came and went. It was like it came out. It looks good too. It's got a ton of art. It's very well laid out. It looks like a Pathfinder book. I mean, a lot of love and care went into this book. I mean, it's really, really good. And I don't know how well it did, but damn, this thing, it's huge. A lot of it is monsters, though. A good half of this is monsters.
It makes sense. There's been some other questions. Warwolf asks how hard it is to develop your own weapons for Pathfinder. Oh, I mean, if you use second person there, and you're asking me how hard it is to develop my own weapons, like maybe not that hard because I like help design the weapon trait system. But for you, it probably wouldn't be that hard as long as it's just for your own table and you don't mind if you accidentally created a weapon that, if you released it online, suddenly would be the meta weapon everybody was using, because then it's just for that one character. And like, it's hard to make a weapon that is that busted for just the one character. It's easy to make a weapon that might be the meta weapon that is just better than all of the other weapons.
Mhm.
And that would be a problem if you released it in an online supplement.
So
There's another question about, can the alchemist true shape Bob affect creatures forced into the transformation via curse, or only people who deliberately polymorph? I think just in general, anything that says it's going to like alter your shape or override a particular effect, even things that say like they'll remove a particular condition from you, you need to look into whether you have an underlying affliction that is causing that condition. Because if you do have an underlying affliction, the general rules for most things that remove the condition caused by the affliction is that if you don't get rid of the underlying affliction, the condition will come back eventually, right? Like if you have a condition that just says for, one whole day, your character is enfeebled by this disease, and that's what happens for this entire day. If you remove the enfeebled, they still have the disease. So at some point, you're going, even a lot of things saying, you're going to have to go back to them. So similarly, if you don't have the ability to actually remove a curse, and a curse is causing a form that, like, let's say the beast from Beauty and the Beast, where he's just is always a beast, he's going to go back to being the beast because that's his curse always. But if the curse was like a curse of the were creature, where you turn into a werewolf temporarily and then revert, it's possible, and you're going to have to decide this for yourself in your story, that it could possibly stop, like, it's like if the light of the full moon lands on your head, you turn into a were creature. That's not exactly how it works in PF2, by the way. But if it was like that and the full moon landed on you and you turn into a were creature and you knock them out, you bring them into the basement where there's no moonlight and you revert them, maybe they're okay, unless they go back out into the moon again. So you have to think about, if they still have an underlying affliction, how it would apply.
and I'm still looking at this
The
Cthulhu book.
Cthulhu.
I think it's impressive. I'm like, really, I didn't really look at it that closely. I'm like, damn, man, this is a lot of work.
Yeah, so let's see. Werewolf meant just how anyone could do it in general. I kind of knew that. I was just kind of, I was trying to be a little silly on that one. And Zolgathor mentions there's a document that people made up to try to help design weapons. Yeah, it's pretty good, but I would say that in general, that you can't just do it algorithmically, where you just add things up and then it makes the weapon seem like it's fine if you add some numbers together, because certain combinations of things are going to seem to be okay or seem to be too weak or too strong that actually aren't, because of the way that they work together, whether the traits are anti-synergistic or synergistic with a lot of other features.
I'm having fun looking. There's a lot of level 20 monsters in here. And there's some pretty cool ones, actually. A pretty interesting book. Um, let's see. There's a lot of questions. Well,
Yep.
we can't keep doing this forever,
Been
but
here for over 2 hours, though.
I
Maybe we
know.
can have another question episode later, and
We'll
people
do
come
another
back for
one.
their
We'll do
question.
another one of these because it looks like everyone has questions and everyone wants to have a question and have a cookie too. Let's see. Skittles and a cookie, Mars bars, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to scroll randomly to the middle because I know we missed a whole bunch in the middle. See if I can find a question that no one said that we didn't answer. I can only scroll back so far. How about that? Mm-hmm. Someone said that Mario 1-1 is the most over discussed bit of game design history.
There you go. See, Steven? It's over discussed. That's how I do it. It's not that strange.
It is discussed heavily. That and I saw a talk at GDC about how the mazes were designed in Pac-Man. That was very, very interesting, especially back then because they didn't even have computers really. They had to do everything on graph paper. And they showed the graph paper they used. It was amazing. I was like, damn, that's hardcore. I mean, they had to do that with 1-1 too. That was all done on graph paper, but still. Do. Oh, looks like we answered a lot of these questions.
Yeah, we did get a bunch of them. There's a few more, and there are more coming in all the time. Do you want me to try to answer more, or should we wrap up?
I will say, one. We'll do more of these question episodes because everyone seems to be interested in them. Just looking. Okay, I'll get this is a good question, and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay.
Is
Final.
and because I have an answer for this too, because I do this a lot. Do you have suggestions on how to run recall knowledge action in combat? The raw system seems too general because it seems like you only tell character things that players already know.
So my suggestion is to just tell people something that their character wouldn't already know. Now, obviously, sure, if you're metagaming, maybe you already know the trolls are weak to fire, but you should generally tell them something that maybe their character doesn't know, and that generally you have a lot of leeway when it says give them a piece of information or something like that. You can decide what that is. I think in the same way let's circle back to hazards when I said make the drawback for failing and getting triggered in the hazard something consequential that means something in the narrative because it's more interesting. Make the success result of recall knowledge consequential by actually cherry pick something that you actually think is useful. It doesn't have to give away everything about the monster's gimmick, maybe unless they get a critical success, but give them something you think that they can use. Maybe, especially if they don't recall knowledge, like before somebody does something else to the monster. Like, let's say people beat on the monster. We actually had this recently where we were beating on a monster and it was clearly a golem. And obviously, we didn't have adamantine weapons. Everyone in the party had fought other golems and knew that adamantine could have worked. But then the caster recalled knowledge and discovered is like, yeah, adamantine worked, but there might be something else that works too on its resistance and get to its resistance. And honestly, the GM could have even just given that to us. But once the GM said that, we decided to try bludgeoning because the monster had a lot of things made out of glass that were on the monster that were shattering sometimes. And because we were all used piercing and slashing normally. So I switched to my shield bash and suddenly it was getting through. And so if you pick something that you know that the party is having to deal with and that will cause some interaction or change and change the fight, then it just makes it more interesting. So I would say just like cherry pick something you think will matter. As opposed to if the dragon breathes fire on you and then you're like, okay, I recall knowledge. And you're like, okay, it's a red dragon. It can breathe fire on you. Like, okay, yeah, sure. But it just breathed fire on me. I know that it can breathe fire on me. So that is an example of picking the absolute worst thing that you could pick, even though it is one of the things that's most known about Red Dragon.
So a few things. One, you can recall knowledge more than once, by the way, which
Yeah, the difficulty keeps going up, but you get more and more pieces of information.
yeah, which people always forget. The other thing is, I'm pretty liberal in our games. I guarantee you, I never run vanilla monsters, so no one knows what the heck they're fighting. Like it's crucial. You have to, and like every one of our every game, every session, every fight, someone has to recall knowledge, or they just guess because they will have no idea what's going on. They will never know what they're fighting, and that's the only way they can find out. I'm pretty
It's good to know
liberal.
their gimmick in advance, right?
What?
Otherwise, you just get hit by it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I also like to give a lot of info, but I'll just say things like, "Oh, they seem to be resistant to bludgeoning," or I don't say it exactly like that. I'll say, well, they're really gooey, so looks like you bounce right off them with your clubs, so I sort of allude to what they have, so I don't say just right out, oh, they have resistance bludgeoning 10. I don't say that. The other thing is, I do this a lot, is if they roll really low, I'll say, okay, you can get one thing. What do you want? And then I just let them know. I'll say, what do you want to know? And that actually works out pretty well too, because then that usually will offer discussion in the group. And they're like, oh, find out if it's resistant to this. Like, no, find out if it can cast the spell, or like, they want to know specific. Then they themselves can figure out what do they want to know. And
Another thing I tend to do in that same vein, Stephen,
Mhm,
is look at the character and
mhm.
what skill they chose to roll, because there's sometimes, like, let's say constructs,
True.
right? You can roll Arcana or Crafting.
Hmm.
So if you rolled Crafting, I might be like telling you about the construction of it and what its resistance
Hmm.
is.
Hmm.
If you roll Arcana, I might tell you about Golem anti magic, because it's like, well, that's how it interacts with magic. So, and you also might think if they're a wizard that's rolling versus like an inventor, inventors would be more, if they're both rolling the same skill. Let's say it was construct lore, so it was kind of ambivalent. That the inventor might care more about construction, whereas the wizard probably cares about what magic does with the golem because they're a wizard and they're always going to be researching related to magic. That's a way to not only give them the thing they want to know, but make it not like this weird meta game where the player is trying to play a game with the GM where they ask for the right one, but you just proactively be nice and give them the one they want. And it
Hmm.
makes sense in the world that their character would have studied the one that they want, because like the
Yeah.
one that will be useful to them. Because if I'm a fire mage and I'm reading a bestiary in the game, like in world, I'm like, oh, let me see what monsters I might fight. The thing I'm going to memorize is like, okay, this one gets healed by fire. I need to remember this because I'm a fire mage and I always shoot fire, so I should
Hmm.
not use fire on that. That's the first thing I'm going to memorize, so it makes
Yeah.
sense to me.
And I like to give out a lot of info because it just makes it more fun. To be honest, it's unless they totally fail the roll, and then in that case, I usually tell them something so ridiculous they know they failed. We're like, oh yeah, that they love getting hit by weapons. It's their favorite thing. Yeah, when it's something so ridiculous, they know that yeah, I must have failed the roll. So someone actually did ask, recall knowledge. Can you retry recall if you fail?
So
And
technically, it's successes that let you get more information. However, because it's a secret check, you can retry it. But if you've already failed the first time, I guess you would know unless you have dubious knowledge. So you shouldn't, because you
mhm.
can't succeed after the first time that you don't make it.
Yeah, and the
So if
way
you crit fail the first time, you might be tricked into trying again, but you can't actually succeed on that one, no matter how high you roll.
so does the GM say which knowledge skills can be rolled, or do players have to guess? The way I do it, I don't even know what the rule is, but the way
The
I
book
do,
doesn't specifically say.
okay,
So let's see how you do it,
the way
Steven.
I do it is I have a macro. I do everything online, and I have a macro that will roll every skill a player has in secret automatically. I use it all the time. I literally press a button and it goes boom, and it just gives me a list. It rolls every skill. And then that way I can just look and I just see. And if I know that, okay, this monster, you could find out information on it using 3 skills, and I'll literally just look at all 3 skills. And I'm like, oh, they succeeded all 3. I'll just tell them everything more or less. But if I see like they failed one and then they like did okay in one and did well in another, I'll tell them some info. I basically just kind of use it in whatever their highest is because that's real life. You might I mean, you use lots of skills to determine things, and you might use, you don't know which skill you failed at or not didn't use. You just know the ones you succeeded at. So I just look at all of them, and then I just choose the one, and whatever did the best is the one I usually use.
So Steven's rule is similar to what I do, but his is definitely a house rule because it gives you mega fortune where you get to roll a ton, like possibly 7 different d20s if you have a lot of skills that apply and you
Yeah,
pick the best one. What
but
I
I
do is
like it
I
in.
roll once,
Okay.
but like you, I look at all of their
Oh, okay.
modifiers and I use the best one. And that includes if one of the modifiers was lower, but it's a lore, so the DC was lower. I
I
pick
see.
whatever is the best skill for them and you roll once, which is similar, but I think mine is within the boundary of the ambiguous rules of the
Yeah,
game. Whereas yours is definitely a house rule because it gives them multiple checks of one action. But
and
I think yours
yeah.
is cool. It just is it's definitely a little nicer because they get a lot. If they have a lot of skills, they get a lot of chances to roll a high roll.
Keep in mind that's the only one I do that with. If anyone else has to roll, I always say, and it's secret. I say, "What are you rolling?" And then it doesn't matter if it rolls a d20 for every skill because
Right.
it's just one. This is the only one. But again, in my games, I like to give them information because they have to spend an action. Actually, that's not true. The investigator gets a free roll, so they get to do it for free. But they chose an investigator, so they get rewarded for being an investigator and knowing stuff about their enemy. And also in my games, if you're using Battle Zoo Bestiary, which no one knows, you probably don't know those monsters that well, or my games have variant monsters almost always. They don't know. They very rarely know what the monsters are. And I'll be honest, in Pathfinder Second Edition, even if you know what the monster is, unless you fought it before, you don't know because they've modified even the most traditional monsters. Golems work different, slimes work different. Everything works a little different. So there's no such thing, I think, as meta information anymore, unless you really know, or you're opening up the book and looking. I think it's very hard for you to know exactly because at this point in time, I have played and seen 10 different versions of the gelatinous cube. Yeah, I kind of know what it does, but how does it work in Pathfinder? I don't know. I can give you a general idea, but it's different. Every one of these monsters is different. So, in my opinion, there's no real thing as meta information unless you actually know for a fact. I think it's you always have to roll because that's the only way you're ever going to be sure. And I also don't like it when you get into fights. They're like, "Oh, it's not supposed to do that." I know. I'm like, no, you don't know. Like that takes that away. I haven't had one of those fights in a long time, but I used to have those fights because they're like, "Oh, I know the rules. That's not how it works. This is you messed it up. You're doing that to punish us." That's like that's an old argument. I'm like, hey man, I'm running pre-written adventures. I will show you the monster. I'm like, it says it right here. This is what it does. I don't have those arguments anymore. But that's something else that you got to be careful with. Is that if you're going to run it, people think they know what they're looking at, and that's something else you could do. Is that you could say, oh, you see a monster, and you're like, okay, it's a gelatinous cube. And they're like, okay, cool, it's on fire. Like, what? I'm like, yep. And that should tell them enough that they know that that's not a regular gelatinous cube. That's going to be some weird hybrid, and they better do a knowledge check because they can't just go by meta knowledge and think they know what they're fighting. That's an old trick, but an very easy one to implement. So,
All right.
I think that's the most I talked all day.
There
So,
you go. Well, I mean, you're recovering, so it's good that you didn't have to put your voice out too much.
yes. So everyone keeps wanting to go, but we can't go forever. It's already 5:30. What 2.5 hours? I thought Mark's like, this will be a quick stream. 2.5 hours later, it's not a
mean,
quick stream.
I could immediately tell once we suddenly had like over 100 people that it was not going to be a quick stream.
I know, and that was a no notice.
Q&As live and die on the number of people that are in there. And yeah, it was no notice. It was an hour after it usually starts. So I didn't expect this, and I'm very happy, and I enjoyed hanging out with all of you, and I'd love to do another
Well, a lot of people
another Ask Pathfinder co-creator Q&A again.
Yeah, we'll definitely do this again because it's a good filler one, and when I don't always have a topic. And quite frankly, you forget, Mark, that you and I live and breathe this and every day. And for a lot of people, I think they just have questions.
I don't forget. I just am used to doing these Q&As on Arcade Mark, and it
Ah.
actually usually gets us fewer
And
viewers.
you get 10 people, 15 people, but
Well, no, that's what we get for our usual topics, but the Q&As don't get as many.
oh,
And
there you
so
go.
I thought we were going to get less than last week's, but we got a lot more. So
Got a lot more.
Yep.
There you go.
Awesome. Thanks for coming, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
And we'll see you in the very near future, probably next week.
Yeah, assuming you're back from your vacation and you're ready for it.
I'll be back on Sunday.
Okay.
All right. See ya.
Bye.